The most common start of women going through perimenopause is like, I can't put my finger on it, but something just doesn't feel right in my body. And like, I shouldn't be feeling the way I'm feeling right now. Like, this is abnormal for me. And I feel as though, like, we just sometimes people accept, oh, I'm just getting old. And absolutely not. You should not be feeling this old at this age. You should still be feeling vibrant. You know when you're not feeling well, and you need to listen to that because our body's signaling to us like, hey, like I'm working super hard and I can't keep up anymore. We have to pay attention to our intuition because that is so unique to women and it's so good for us to do.
Welcome to the Gen X Shift podcast, a show for Gen Xers who are navigating some pretty tough transitions and aren't sure how to move forward. I'm your host, Michelle Walter, proud Gen Xer, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, huge Jason Momoa fan, and margarita snob. And I've navigated a lot of transitions in my life, from losing my mom suddenly to a heart attack to starting my own business. But I often did it all on my own because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Now I'm on a mission to give actionable strategies to other Gen Xers so that they can find the confidence, courage, and clarity they need to make a shift. So let's rock and roll. Hey Gen Xers, welcome back to the podcast. The episode this week is probably one of the most, if not the most important episodes I've recorded thus far. And I hope to have more conversations like this. Because this week we're talking about the very important topic of perimenopause and menopause. We'll just call it menopause for short. And it's a conversation that I hope not only the Gen X ladies and the older millennials and the younger boomers listen to, but also the guys. Because guys, you know a woman, or you are going to know a woman who is going through or has been through menopause. If you are someone who was born with ovaries, you're going to go through menopause. And if you're a guy, you know somebody who was born with ovaries. The conversation around menopause isn't one that has really started happening until about the last 5 years. I personally have witnessed on social media and in a lot of the circles that I run that women are longing for more conversations about perimenopause and menopause. These conversations are ones that have been stigmatized for a long time. Women have been conditioned to believe that there should be a lot of shame and silence around perimenopause and menopause. Hell, a lot of women don't even know what the hell perimenopause and menopause are. So my guest this week is Suzanne Greiner. Suzanne is a board-certified nurse coach, and she focuses on perimenopause and menopausal women. We get into the episode about how Suzanne and I met, very synchronistic meeting, as is usually the case with a lot of my guests. And this conversation is one that I hope just is a drop in the bucket to the number of conversations that I want to bring to this podcast about the topic of menopause, because it's something I'm personally really fired up about. And it's a conversation that we need to normalize, because perimenopause and menopause are normal parts of life for women, just like teenage hormonal changes are normal parts of life, and pregnancy hormonal changes and post-pregnancy hormonal changes are normal parts of life. Suzanne and I cover a lot of ground, and this might be a conversation that you want to take some notes for. Have to insert the lawyer medical disclaimer here because this episode is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. So do not use this podcast as a basis for self-diagnosis or treatment of any medical condition, including perimenopause and menopause. Please consult with your healthcare provider before making any decisions related to your health. And the views expressed on this podcast are solely for those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any organization. So with that legal mumbo jumbo behind, let me give you an overview of what Suzanne and I get into. First of all, we define what perimenopause and menopause are, so you can have that working definition and know exactly what we're talking about. We also talk about how to know if you're in perimenopause, which, by the way, can start as young as 35. And we talk about the new documentary, The M Factor. I'm going to link the website for that documentary in the show notes, as well as a lot of other information in the show notes this week. So please make sure to check out the show notes so you can get all of this information. But the M factor really woke me up about perimenopause and menopause and about hormone replacement therapy, which is one of the topics that Suzanne and I also talk about. I will admit, I was somebody who was adamantly opposed to hormone replacement therapy. My view of that has recently changed in the last few months, thanks in part due to this documentary. Now, this does not mean, again, that we are recommending hormone replacement therapy. And we want to become aware that, as the documentary, the M Factor, talks about, a lot of the resistance to hormone replacement therapy is due to a 2002 study by the Women's Health Initiative that basically said hormone replacement therapy will increase your risk of breast cancer and heart disease. We get into that conversation and how that has since been debunked. And we talk about what hormone replacement therapy is and the benefits of it. Now, again, consult your healthcare provider, because it may not be for you if you have certain risk factors. And I want to at least invite us to possibly put hormone replacement therapy back on the table as something that could support us in our menopause journey. So we talk about hormone replacement therapy as well as other options for supporting your menopause journey, from nutrition to exercise to sleep and to stress management. And finally, we plant some valuable information about how you can find a doctor or a nurse practitioner who is actually trained in menopause and hormone replacement therapy. And Suzanne has a wonderful free download that I invite you to make sure that you grab, that will walk you through how you can have a conversation with your healthcare provider about perimenopause and menopause. So it's a jam-packed episode. I hope that this cracks the door open for you to start having these conversations. And as I said, you might want to take some notes for this one. So settle in, grab a pen and pencil, paper, whatever you use to write with. Grab Suzanne's free download, enjoy this conversation, and I'll catch you on the other side. Hey, Suzanne, thanks for coming on the Gen X Shift. I appreciate you being here this morning with me.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I imagine that you, as we were talking about just before we hopped on the call, that you are a little low on energy because you have been running like the Energizer Bunny the last few weeks, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. But I just want folks to know that this is going to be a conversation that we could probably go for 4 or 5 hours. So it's going to be jam-packed, full of really good information and hopefully inspiring for a lot of women to hear, and men too. Like, I want to encourage dudes to listen to this, because
Absolutely.
most men are going to have women in their lives who are going through menopause. And so it's going to be good information for everyone all around. And I just
Absolutely
really appreciate knowing you. I want to tell folks before we get started that I full on stalked you on Instagram because I had been the last several months, actually over the last year probably, educating myself more on menopause, and we'll get into that a little bit, and learned of the M Factor documentary, which we're also going to talk about. And somehow in my Instagram feed, probably because I was engaging a lot with the M Factor documentary on Instagram and the people who are in the documentary, you came up in my feed somehow. And so I thought, well, let me check out her profile. And I checked it out, and you lived in Denver, you do mindfulness hikes, you're a coach. And I'm like, all right, I need to reach out to this woman. So I messaged you on Instagram, and you got back to me pretty quickly. And then we just texted each other, and turns out we live less than 2 miles from each other. So we met up for coffee like the following weekend at one of our local coffee shops, Summer Moon, which is amazing. Shout out to Summer Moon in Thornton.
So good.
And what we met at like 9:00.
Yeah.
Was it? And then pretty soon we were just chatting away. And then pretty soon we looked at our watch and we're like, holy crap, it's 1:00. So,
Exactly.
so we have a, go ahead.
It just flowed so easily, and just like we had so many things in common, and just it was definitely a great conversation. It just flowed so nicely. But yeah, that was funny. So
yeah. So you have been really busy the last few weeks because you have been doing screenings for the
Mhm.
M Factor documentary. And so
Absolutely.
I want to get into your background and what has led you up to doing that work. And
Mhm.
so, before we get into your business and the work that you're doing as a board certified nurse coach and how you got involved with the M Factor, I want to completely rewind the tape and
Mhm.
take us back to what life was like growing up for you as a Gen Xer in Missouri and sort of take us through how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I'm a middle child. So that explains everything, right?
Yep, yep.
But I grew up in actually Missouri, super small town. I grew up on a farm. I have a lot of farming roots in my family. And so a lot of that just kind of, I don't know, like that pull up at your bootstraps and get to work kind of mentality. And so I grew up on a farm. Um, it was really, it's such like now that I'm 48 and looking back on that lifestyle, it's just like, that was so, just like this pure, natural type of, living that you grow up in. And you don't think about anything else but like just day to day survival, which is good and bad. But my parents had always wanted us to do something more for our lives than live on a farm after high school. So they really encouraged, I have two sisters, an older and younger sister. They really encouraged me or encouraged us to really go to college to get a degree. So we're the first generation family members to actually get a college degree in our family, and they just wanted a life better for us than they had for their selves. And so they just really encouraged us to do that. So sometimes it was like, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go to college. So, and that's what I did. I went to college. And I went to nursing school in Kansas City and got, it was so funny growing up on, like, my graduating class was 48, and moving from this super small town into the city life in Kansas City. It was a huge shift for me. And it's like, this is fun and fancy free. I'm like on my own. I'm like, growing up and like, I kind of thought, I was better than my parents thought like, you think that your crap doesn't stink now that you live in the city kind of thing. And I probably contributed to that, unfortunately. Like, when you're 20, 18 to 22, you think you know everything. And then you start working and you have that big reality of like, oh, like I have bills to pay for. I have all this stuff to pay for. And it's a big shift for that. So I started my nursing career actually at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. So I was really fortunate to get a job right out of nursing school and working for them, which led to a huge foundation for my nursing career to really be aware of the patient as the center of your care, of taking care of them. And it was such a great experience growing up, and really, I think growing up on the farm, it was like one of those things that you just take care of your people and you take care of the people who are surrounding you. People came together as a community to help others that were in need. And so I think, and then I always watched my parents. They never knew a stranger, so they were always about connecting with other people. That whole community and connecting has like resonated through my whole entire life into adulthood. And I didn't realize how much that was until like I, started doing other things in my nursing career, how much that was so important. But yeah, so then I kind of lived my life, got married, had three kiddos, worked in the nursing career, but there was always this drive for me to want to do something more, but I just didn't know what it was. Like I had this entrepreneurial spirit inside of me, but I just didn't know like what can I do as a nurse, And that was just, it was taking me a while to discover that. And then of course, life happens, you have life events happen. I went through a divorce. And then actually through that divorce, that's a big transition. I started rediscovering who I was. And through the healing of that divorce, I really like that flame of that entrepreneurship came inside of me and more. And I was trying to search for things to do, but it was more of, I couldn't figure out like what was my, what lit me up or what would light me up even more. And so it was taking some time. And then, one of my friends, as you know, we're really close, we work together as, nurses in the ICU unit here in, the area. And we went hiking one day and she came up to me and she goes, "Hey, you need to become a board certified nurse coach." And I'm like, "I don't want to coach nurses." And she's like, "No, no, no, no. This is all about well-being and taking care of the patients. This is the reason why we went into nursing, to have that holistic viewpoint of taking care of people and helping them prevent things or their wellness, or really focusing on, helping them at the core." And so when I looked into it and started going into into the nurse coaching field, I was like, this is so good. I love this aspect. I love getting to the root of the problem, like what's going on. So I started coaching a lot of people in, that area. But then a little over a year and a half ago, I started going through my own journey of perimenopause, and that was insightful to say the least.
Let's be
That
real.
was
Insightful is like the bare minimum that is. Yeah.
It was like, you start like realizing, this is that subtle shift. Like, there's something going on with myself. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. And then, like, all of a sudden I felt like the floor gave out and like I hit rock bottom. I mean, it was just like you're going along in life, just totally going along just fine. And all of a sudden, boom, like you fall, the floor falls out from underneath you. And you're like, WTF, like, what is going on with me? And, so I started like, do you want me to go into my symptoms and everything that, kind of
Let's
led
yeah,
me?
we're gonna get into that, yeah, in a little bit, because I
Okay.
want to walk through the symptoms and stuff. But I do
Yeah.
you told a really powerful story at the M Factor screening that I
Mm,
was at the other night about your menopause journey
right.
and what you did once you kind of reclaimed your power through that journey. So
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So about 18 months ago, I started going through some of, like I started realizing like, hey, like something just doesn't feel right. And that's like the most common start of women going through perimenopause. Is like, I can't put my finger on it, but something just doesn't feel right in my body. And that nudge I think our body gives us to be like, hey, I'm working really hard on you, like to get you into homeostasis, and I'm starting to like have, go a little haywire a little bit. And so it's this little nudge. And so anyway, I started like with joint pain. I started having really bad joint pain. We talked about, I love hiking. And so I, would go hiking for like 3 to 4 miles, and, I would come back and I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sore. And I would be sore for 1 to 2 days afterwards. Like I felt as though I hiked like 10 to 12 miles. And it was really kind of frustrating for me because I'm like, I love hiking. And like, this is my solitude. This is like the, time that I can reconnect with myself and regenerate energy for the rest of the week, and to really, find that grounded space that I need, to like be a mom of three teenagers. And that was really hard. And then I would wake up and, wake up in the morning, go down the stairs, and like I would be holding on to the banner because my hips and my ankles were so stiff. And I'm like, at the time I was 47, I'm like, I feel like I'm in an 87-year-old body. And then I started having this it started off slow weight gain, and it ended up being almost 25 pounds of extra weight I gained, in a matter of about 9 months. So it was like kind of like the slow gain, and all of a sudden it just accelerated. And I hadn't changed my diet, I hadn't changed my exercise routine. So I'm like, I'm not doing anything different. Why am I gaining this much weight? And then, about a little, like last fall, I started developing like, brain fog. And that's when I knew, I'm like, this is perimenopause. This has to be, because I feel like I have dementia. And like, it was so like the word finding was so hard, forgetfulness, like all this stuff. Like, this is not like me. And so I would be on meetings and I would feel like, I was just like not putting together any sort of, make any sense for this meeting. And I just felt this shame because I'm like, I cannot perform as my normal self working in this environment. And I'm like, question like my abilities. And that was like kind of heartening. And so once I started having that brain fog, I started like realizing, this has to be perimenopause. And so I started reading up and doing a lot of research on perimenopause. What are the symptoms? what are the, like, what can I do? And because I had an upcoming yearly appointment, I'm like, I'll just talk to my, PCP at the time during my yearly appointment and find some solutions. So I go into my PCP appointment armed and ready. Like, I put a lot of weight on that appointment because I wanted solutions because I felt like crap. And I was just like, I had a list and I ended up having about 17 symptoms of perimenopause. And there's over 70 symptoms that are
Yes.
related to perimenopause and menopause, which is so crazy. But it makes sense because you have hormone receptors in every major organ system in your body. And so when your hormones start to fluctuate, your whole body is going to react in some way. So I had 17 symptoms, I had an armed and ready with this list. I walk into my PCP's appointment. She walks into the exam room. She goes, "Hey, how are you doing?" I said, "Not so good. I feel like I'm in perimenopause. I have 17 symptoms." And like looking back, like you're like, it's probably not the best thing you tell your PCP. Like, I have 17 symptoms. Here you go. Here's this long list of symptoms. But she kind of was taken aback a little bit, and she asked me two questions. She asked me, "Are you still having menstrual cycles?" And I said, "Yes, I am, but I have a IUD in place, so it kind of, it's different than what it has been." And then she's like, "Okay, well, you're definitely not in menopause because that's, 12 months without a menstrual cycle." I'm like, "Well, I understand that. That's why I said I'm in perimenopause." And then she's like, "Well," which is so funny, but she knows I'm a nurse too. So that's the funny thing. It's like, yeah, I do my research before I go in. So, and then she asked me, she goes, "Are you having any hot flashes?" And I told her no. Out of the 17 symptoms I had, not one of them's a hot flash. And so she told me, she goes, "I have 20 minutes to spend with you." She goes, "Either we can talk to you about your perimenopause symptoms or we can talk to you about your yearly appointment, but I don't have time to talk to you about both." And when she said that to me, my heart sunk. But also, like, I know this is our healthcare today. I mean, this is
Yep.
like they have 20-minute appointments with you for your yearly exam, and trying to squeeze everything into that one appointment. It's hard, it's difficult. But I just felt as though I put so much weight in that appointment to find solutions that like it just like devastated me. Because she had already made up her mind. She had 20 minutes to spend with me, and I was just like, this is not, what I thought this appointment was going to be about. And so I told him, like, well, kind of need both. Like, I'm miserable with my perimenopause, but I also need my yearly exam, and I don't want to waste time to come back in for another appointment. And she's like, "Okay, well, tell me more about your symptoms." And so I went through my list of symptoms, and she found two symptoms that she could treat, because she refused to do any blood work, refused to do any of that because I was still, cycling, still have my menstrual cycle and everything. She refused to do any of that. And because it fluctuates, I understand that. But at the same time, it was so frustrating because I just felt miserable. And so I went through my list, and she said, "Oh, like, you have increased anxiety and, this brain fog. I can give you an anti-anxiety medication. It could help you with your new increased anxiety, but it may kind of help you with your brain fog too. I've seen some people have that increase, the ability to have that less brain fog taking this anxiety medication." And I looked at her and I said, "Absolutely not. You're treating the symptoms of perimenopause and not actually taking in account what's causing my symptoms, which are my fluctuations in my hormones." And she kind of looked at me as though, like, "Why, you're not taking you're not going to take this prescription." And I told her, "I'm going to find solutions for my perimenopause. And if for some reason I need to come back and get that prescription, I will come back. But I'm refusing that prescription. I have yet to go back to, to get that prescription." But I went out to my car. I sat in my car and I cried because I've been a nurse for, like, at that time was 25 years. And I've been taking care of patients and helping advocate for their well-being and their health and their, illnesses that they're going through. I used to be an ICU nurse, so I would like take care of patients at their sickest. And then also, like, I would teach family members how to advocate for their loved ones. And here I was like in the same boat of like advocating for my own health care as a nurse. And I was just thinking, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. As nurses or people in healthcare, we know how to navigate the healthcare system, to like, we work in it day to day. So we know how to navigate that. But for me to be on that recipient end of like having to really like advocate for myself, I was just like, how many thousands of women are experiencing this every single day, that they're going in to see their providers, being dismissed by their symptoms of perimenopause or even menopause. I have friends that are menopause and they're having the same treatment. And I was just like, this is not right. And I made a promise to myself. I'm like, I never want another woman to feel the way I'm feeling right now. And so it's so crazy because that appointment was 11 months ago. And just I would say the last 3, 4 months has been like this wild ride of like, I never would have thought that promise I made to myself like 11 months ago would lead me to where I'm, at today, doing the M factor screenings. We've had over 120 women attend those in the last 3 weeks, and it's just been amazing. And people want more, like they want more screenings, they want more events. So I'm just kind of following the lead of what the women are wanting and speaking up about in the area. So it's been a lot of fun.
I thank you for sharing that story, first of all. Second of all, I want to come back to a couple of things that you said and highlight, first of all, that you advocating for yourself and sticking up for yourself is such an important takeaway from your story, because a lot of women, especially when it comes to the healthcare system, especially a lot of women in communities of culture, Black women, Latina women,
Absolutely.
Asian women, feel even less empowered to speak up for themselves in a healthcare system that has historically marginalized and abused them, right? And so being able to find that voice within you to advocate for yourself so that you're not gaslighting yourself.
Right.
And you're not letting the doctors gaslight you, which is sort of the second big takeaway, is that, and God knows, we could do like an entire year's worth of podcasts on how broken our medical system is in the United States. And I have empathy for doctors and having to work within that system.
Yeah.
And doctors also gaslight patients very easily, and especially women when it comes to the symptoms that we're experiencing, because the thing with menopause is it's such a toxic shit show cocktail of symptoms that can be attributed to so many different things too, right? So it's hard to kind of unravel all that. And I want to come back to that in just a second. The other thing I wanted to highlight from your story is that, and you kind of said this and glossed over it a little bit, but you are a divorced single mom of 3 kids who started her own business. So let's just celebrate the crap out of that. Okay. And I might have to have you back for another podcast episode to talk about exactly how you did that.
That's a whole other story in itself. It's crazy.
It's amazing. How old were you when you got divorced, by the way?
Oh, that was 7 years ago. So that would be, I was right at 40. I just turned 41. So yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And then having my oldest child was hitting middle school. So that was a joyful experience because I felt as though like, because I was the one that, asked for the divorce. I just, that's a whole other episode in itself. But I also, you have that guilt of like, I feel like I just screwed up my kids. And they were like in middle, my oldest being in middle school and then the rest, in elementary. You feel like you just screwed them up for the rest of your life. And like at the same time, now like 7 years later, I mean, the kids are pretty healthy. That's a whole journey of itself. But yeah, it's a lot. Our arrangement is that I have my kids during the week, Monday through, or like Sunday evening and Monday morning, sometimes to Friday afternoon. So like I'm doing all their appointments, their school activities, and their dad is involved. Their dad does come, and supports them. Like I can't say anything bad about their dad being super supportive, because he's supportive of them. But it's just that I'm tasked with all those extra, running errands, taking the kids here, there, and everywhere. And then I'll ask him for like, hey, like I'm supposed to be in 2 places at one time. Can you help? And he's super helpful with that. If he wasn't in the picture, it would be a lot more harder. But like at the same time, it's a lot. Like, just add on that. And then you have aging parents still. Like, so you just add that in. You're just in that sandwich generation. So yeah, it's a lot. Like it's looking back, I mean, no wonder why my cortisol was probably like, super high. So like,
you think? Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Gen X women, as well as like younger boomers,
Mhm.
older millennials are
Oh,
in perimenopause or menopause right now for the most part,
right.
right? And that is just an additional layer on top of all the other crap that we
Right.
are dealing with at this stage of life, like basically 40 and 40 and beyond, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's what makes it kind of hard to tease things out as to what's really going on.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I hope that women take away some inspiration from your journey. And again, I would love to have you back to talk about the entrepreneurial journey and post
Yeah.
divorce and being a single mom and all of that. To know that 40 and beyond does not mean you're going to go downhill.
Oh,
That there's
no.
still so much life and so much
There
for for you to step into in 40 and beyond.
Absolutely. And I think that was the frustration with where I was at a little over a year ago. Like, I shouldn't be feeling the way I'm feeling right now. Like, this is abnormal for me. And I feel as though, like, we just sometimes people accept, oh, I'm just getting old. And
Yeah.
like they accept it and like absolutely not. You should not be feeling this old at this age. You should still be feeling vibrant. And like there's your body is telling you. And that's what I usually tell my clients is that, number one, you live in your body 24/7. You know when you're not feeling well. And you need to listen to that because our body's signaling to us like, hey, like I'm working super hard and I can't keep up anymore. Something needs to change. And so it starts giving these symptoms to us. And like, what do we need to do? And we need to start investigating that even more. But then, secondly, for women, we have to trust our intuition. Like, we are super intuitive beings. That's the feminine role of who we are, is to be intuitive. And we've been told by society, we've been told by so many different people that, oh, you're just being crazy. Oh, you're overthinking. Oh, like they dismiss it. They make us dismiss what we're feeling or what our intuition is telling us. And really just, we have to pay attention to our intuition because that is so unique to women and it's so good for us to do. So like those are the things like yeah, like to really trust that so you don't get gaslit whenever you go to a doctor's office or you don't, get gaslit in society of being that crazy menopausal woman. So
Yeah, yeah. And that's great advice. Thank you for that because we want to learn how to start to be curious about the
mhm,
experience that we're having and that whole mindset and the conditioning that we hear of, oh, it's just aging. I have so many friends that say that, oh, it's just
right,
aging, oh, whatever. They'll complain, for lack of a better word,
right,
about
yeah,
all of these symptoms they're experiencing and then they're like, oh, nothing I can do about it. And
right,
I think one of the things I hope this conversation does for women is to let them know there are things that you can do
yeah,
about it, and we're going to talk about some
absolutely.
of those things. Tell me, when did you start your business, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you do with your business, and then we're going to move into all the menopause nitty gritty stuff. So when did you start your business?
Actually 3 years ago this month. So happy anniversary for my business.
Yay,
So
congrats.
I finished my certification program in October of 2021. And then I was like, I want my own private practice. It was never a thought that I want to like, um, be a part, like work in a hospital system as a nurse coach or anything like that. I'm like, I want my own business. I want to be able to help people. And that's that entrepreneurial spirit that I had like growing up. And I think it's probably because I saw my parents like being self-employed farmers and seeing, they work really hard. Like, it's almost like the farm like owned them versus them owning the farm.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just a lot of, but that was like that drive inside of me that I want to create something more. I want to impact more people. But I just didn't know how to do that. And so when I did the coaching, that's when I was just like, I want to have my own private practice to be able to help others, especially like and that's when I was like drawn to women my age or going through similar experiences that I'm going through because it's just like no one was giving me a path or a guide or like a trail map or anything like that to like how do I navigate this. And a lot of times I'm like I made a lot of terrible decisions but I also made really amazing decisions of like being super authentic about my about who I am and what I'm experiencing. And then the more I'd said that, the more I realized more and more women are feeling the same way that I'm feeling.
Yep.
So yeah, 3 years ago I started this, and it's been a process of learning to coach women in this field as well as growing a business. It's a lot of juggling and also having three teenagers and, all that other stuff that comes along with just day-to-day life. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And tell us the name of your business and sort of the type of women who you are drawn to work with the most.
Suzanne Greiner Coaching as my business title. I just kept it simple.
Yeah.
But I work with women going through perimenopause and menopause just to really help them along their journey. Obviously, I can't prescribe hormone replacement therapy, but I can really talk to them about their lifestyle changes that they can make during this time frame, because I feel like it is a little bit different than what we've been told. Like, I feel like Gen Xers, we're that generation, like, oh, let's try all this fitness trend. Let's try all this skincare trend. Let's all do all these different trends. And so we've been like, having fad diets all of our life, but really it's like coming, what is actually nourishing your body correctly during this perimenopausal, menopausal stage, because it is quite different than what we probably have been used to. And then also, like, I want to make sure, like, for me personally, like, I want to be hiking when I'm 85 years old. And so, what can I be doing today to help my physical body to be active when I'm 85? And so, there's things that you can do differently in perimenopause and menopause, like, increase your strength training. So, maybe you're not used to doing that. And so, it's just a lot of that stress management and sleep. And so, it's a lot of those lifestyle changes of really helping my clients to really thrive during this time period instead of like just surviving. So.
That's amazing. So let's talk about breaking down perimenopause and menopause to kind of clear the air about
Mhm.
a lot of myths and misinformation that's been circulating around out there. So let's start, first of all, with just some definitions of perimenopause and menopause, or what I've often referred to as postmenopause. And we can talk a little bit about
Yeah.
that, but tell us your definitions of those terms.
So perimenopause is before you go through menopause. So perimenopause can happen 7 to 10 years before you hit menopause. Menopause is 1 year, full year of not having a menstrual cycle. It was often referred to menopause as that one day that you've had 365 days that you haven't had a period, and then after that, then it's your postmenopausal. But I
Yeah.
know, like, some people are like, "Oh, it's your menopause," and so,
Hmm.
but technically, you're officially menopause when it's been 365 days without having a menstrual cycle. But perimenopause is it's hard to define because you have the fluctuations of your hormones. So you have three main hormones. You have estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone. Um, Men and women have all three, definitely at varying degrees, different levels. Obviously, men have more testosterone than women. Women have more progesterone and estrogen. But we, as humans, we have all three hormones. So women go along in life, from puberty, early 20s, cycling, having babies. And then all of a sudden we hit this time period where we're only born with so many eggs in our body, in our ovaries. And so we get towards the end of life of our eggs. And that's when we start having the fluctuations of the progesterone and estrogen. Testosterone is this gentle decline over time usually, but sometimes women and men both can drop off in their testosterone levels pretty quickly. And so when we have that drop, we can definitely feel, symptoms from that. But so yeah, so it's just a lot of it. That perimenopausal phase is a chaotic mess of hormones. Because some months you could be cycling just fine, hormone levels are adequate. The next month you could have very low levels, or sometimes you just get, this splatter of like hormones for the month. So I'm actually on hormone replacement therapy, thank goodness. I feel so much better being on it, but I can still, because I'm still cycling, I can feel like there are some months that my estrogen's a little bit lower. And I'm like, okay, I have more symptoms of my lower estrogen, which is usually ear itching and my scalp itches. I'm like, okay, my estrogen's a little bit lower this month. I can tell. But yeah, so that perimenopause is just a fluctuation. And it's really hard during this time frame because there's a lot of misconceptions during this time frame. A lot of and it's I don't want to point fingers at the doctors because they weren't trained I think there was that big stigma with a WHI study that came out in 2002, and so everyone became afraid of hormone replacement therapy, and they don't get a lot of training with women. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So I think they're trying to do their best, but they often, are not doing the best at that. I would say OBGYNs are a little bit more trained than regular primary care providers just because, they have, they're more focused on women's health than primary care. But there are a lot of misconceptions during perimenopause that, you can't be on any hormone therapy until after you hit menopause, which is not true. You can be on hormone therapy during perimenopause. So,
Yeah. And I want to come back to the the WHI study
yeah.
and more recent information about hormone replacement therapy. Uh, what on average age, and I know that this depends, can vary to among different racialized classes of women, but in general, when do women start perimenopause?
So the average age of menopause for a woman in the US is about 51, 52. And so usually if you back up, 7 to 10 years, that's putting a woman at like about 45. But if you give or take a little, or
Yeah.
give or take, or a little years, it could be anywhere from, you start experiencing perimenopause 35 to 45 time frame. Like I was 47 when I really started experiencing perimenopause. I probably had some
Yeah.
symptoms at 46, but it varies. I mean, it varies on your race and ethnicity. It varies on
Mhm.
your genetics, and it varies on if you had trauma as a child. It's a
Mm.
lot of that can happen too. If you smoke, if you've had cancer and you received chemotherapy, there's so many other factors that play into when you potentially could go through perimenopause. And I think that's the great unknown, that especially I feel really like my heart goes out to the women that are 35 to 39 that are experiencing perimenopause because they are gaslit probably the
Yep.
most. And
Yep.
because they're in the younger age, and there is a class of women that experience menopause prematurely at a younger age. They are the ones that are having menopause at like 40 or under 45. And so that's like a huge shift for them because they are very like active at that age. I mean, they may have a lot of little ones running around and stuff,
Hmm.
or maybe they haven't even been married yet and they're still hoping to get married and have kids, and yet they've just gone through menopause. So my heart goes, I mean, I have so much empathy towards them because they, are gaslit the most. But I would say the average age of going through perimenopause, I would say between 40 and 45 is a good subclass of women, that age group. They start experiencing those symptoms, and it's hard because they know that they're not experiencing life the way they're supposed to at that time, and then they go to their physician and like just telling them, I don't feel good, like, oh well, maybe you need to sleep more, maybe you need to reduce your stress, and it's actually probably perimenopause. So
Yeah. That's great information because I think women want to be aware that
mhm,
this could be one of the many things going on for them in their life. So, kind of coming back
absolutely.
to let's not gaslight yourself. And
Mhm.
honestly, coming back to your story and my story too, about it, just you don't feel right, you just don't feel like yourself. And yeah, there could be a lot going on in your life, so don't gaslight yourself and say,
Right.
well, I'm just unhappy with my job, or I'm just unhappy with my marriage, or I'm unhappy being single, and I'm just depressed, or I'm just anxious, I just need to meditate more. Let's start to become aware of the fact that perimenopause symptoms can start much earlier than most people are aware of, and
Right.
get curious about that so that maybe you're going to your doctor on a more regular basis and starting to get your arms around that. I want to just share just a quick personal story of mine. I think I probably started going through perimenopause in hindsight when I was in my early 40s, and it wasn't even on my radar. I think because I was a stressed out attorney, had all kinds of things going on. Who would think, and this is the Gen Xer problem too. Like, we're so great at dismissing our pain as it is, and so Gen X women in particular, coming back to your pull yourself up by your bootstraps, we're just like, I'm just going to suck it up. I'm super depressed. I'm moody. I'm having all kinds of mood swings. I'm tired. I'm sleeping too much. Like all the things. I just need to suck it up and figure out how to fix myself, right? So let's be a little kinder with ourselves, and let's put perimenopause on the table as something that we're considering. So I remember when
Right.
I was working at DOJ, I think it was after I moved to Colorado. So I was probably, can't even do the math, like 46 or 47-ish, and was, for a number of reasons, again, unhappy in my job, like lots of things going on. So I was very depressed and anxious, and unwittingly going through perimenopause. So at that time, I remember we were working on a big environmental case, and we'd been preparing for a meeting with a very important front office political appointee for weeks, preparing our team for this meeting, getting ready for it. Even the day before the meeting, we were prepping for it and who was going to say what and all this stuff. The day of the meeting, I wake up, hadn't slept well, felt like crap, had a headache, and I'm like, I'm taking a sick day. So like messaged everybody, hey, I'm not feeling well, turned the phone off, completely forgot about this meeting, was not even
Oh
on
my
my
goodness.
radar. Wake up later in the afternoon to all these messages on the phone, like, where are you? The meeting is starting. Like,
Oh
oh shit.
no.
Like, it just did not even occur to me. And same thing, experiencing so much brain fog, so much
Yeah.
lack of focus, like trying to read
Mhm.
through cases or write a brief, like
Oh my
words just
gosh.
weren't wording, you know?
Right.
And so I subsequently went to my doctor because I was like, there is something going on with me. And of
Mhm.
course, you do my doctor's office now, I think it's pretty standard. They do the depression screening,
Right.
at the doctor's
Right.
office. And I'm like, yes, 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 like all the
Mhm.
things. And so my
Right.
doctor's like, oh, you're depressed. I'm like, but yeah. And there's something else going on. Well, they did the blood work, and then they called me, a week or so later and said, it looks like you're in perimenopause. And it
Mhm.
just hit me like a ton of bricks because it hadn't even been on my radar. And
Right.
so, of course, I started Googling and getting really curious and learned, oh, brain fog, lack of focus, all the
Yeah.
things.
It's
So
like check.
yes, I fortunately worked in a fabulous office, and had a
Mm.
wonderful manager who was a man. And so I went to him, bless his heart. I called him one day and said, look, you're about to get way more information than you ever wanted. And I said, here's what I think is going on. Here's why I'm like having trouble, kind of struggling, forgot about the meeting, yada, yada. And he was so wonderful. And I'm so
Oh,
privileged to have,
that's so good.
yeah, a lot of people don't have that. I was very fortunate. And I said, and I want you to know, because you have a lot of women working for you.
Mhm.
And just
I
because
mean,
they are younger women doesn't mean that they're not going to be experiencing these symptoms. So I just wanted to share that personal story as, again, a reminder
right.
to start to recognize these symptoms as they're coming up.
Mhm.
So I wanted to see if we could do kind of a fun little game almost, because you
Okay.
mentioned, and the M Factor movie, which we are going to talk
Mhm.
about here in a second, talks about this too, that there are potentially over 70 symptoms of perimenopause.
Yeah.
So I thought we could do like just a little back and forth where we each throw out like a symptom that maybe we've personally experienced or maybe observed in other people. And we'll just kind of play it out until we run out of ideas, but just to start to give women an idea of all the different symptoms. How does that sound?
Symptoms we've had personally, or just symptoms that we
Both,
know of?
like whatever. Yeah,
Okay.
either one. Yeah. I'll start. I'll start with
Okay.
just
Mhm.
depression as one of my
Oh,
symptoms.
yeah.
Okay, you go.
Weight gain,
Brain fog,
ADHD symptoms,
anxiety.
ear itching,
Oh yes, dry skin.
um, dental changes.
Oh yeah, we're gonna come back to that one. Dry hair.
Oh, loss of hair.
Yeah.
My
uh,
hair's so good.
like lack of focus,
Oh yeah, yeah. Irritability.
joint pain.
I have to say this, decreased libido.
Yes, thank you for saying that. Vaginal dryness.
Yeah. Um, pins and needle feeling running up and down your arms.
Yes, and is going like trying to go to sleep, like
Oh,
noticing, feeling like I'm being eaten by bugs while I'm trying to go to sleep. Yeah.
yeah. Night sweats.
Oh yeah, hot flashes.
I'm trying to think of some
If we've
off the
run
wall.
out, we've run out. But Okay.
Well, I
I
feel like
just
heart palpitations, that's a
yes,
common one. Um,
exhaustion,
yeah.
fatigue.
Oh gosh, exhaustion. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know
I mean,
there's a
that just
ton more.
yeah.
I'll go listen to this, like, oh, you forgot about this, this, and this, and
Yeah.
oh,
Again, there's
decrease
like
the strength, like your muscle tone is
oh
just like,
yeah, muscle loss, collagen
yeah,
loss, like
yeah,
saggy skin. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, the point of that is like start to get curious. Again, we're not trying to like WebMD people and say, oh, if you have
no,
all of those, you're in
right,
perimenopause. Again, it's to raise your awareness around the fact that this
no.
could also be going on top of everything else. Um,
Ideally,
eh,
what should happen is like you make a list of your symptoms and you have a conversation with your provider. Because what if you do have heart issues? Like, I would
yeah,
want you to make sure you have that conversation with your provider. Like, these are my symptoms I'm experiencing. And they can do that investigation. Do we need to do more testing or not? But a lot of times, women will go through a lot of extra testing, a lot of extra diagnosis, and they're often over medicated during this time frame. So it's just really good to have that conversation with your a provider that is trained in perimenopause and menopause as well. So
yeah. So let's talk about that because number one, you're providing a great handout for our listeners. What's that handout called and how can they use it?
uh the one to talk to their providers about,
Yeah,
like, yeah. So
yeah.
basically I have this handout or this download that you can have, that will link, I think you'll link it to the podcast.
Hmm.
But basically it's like, these, I have clients go through, like, these are the symptoms I'm having, like, this is how debilitating they are, and then I tell, help you to have that conversation. What do you need to say to your provider, and questions to ask your provider during your visit when you have these symptoms. So we'll have that available for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll link that in the show notes. So pause the audio video now and make sure to download that and go over it. And maybe the best thing to do before we kind of go into how do you find a doctor, how do you have these conversations with a doctor, is to back up and talk about one of the many things that the M Factor documentary talks
Mhm.
about. And maybe we should just even talk about that, like back the truck
Yeah.
way up and talk about that first.
Yeah.
Um, the M Factor documentary, and I'll let you explain more of it since you've been kind of intimately involved with hosting the screenings, but it is I've watched it now twice. I still want to go back
Mhm.
and watch it and take notes. It's available on PBS. So just look
Correct.
at your local PBS station and see when it airs, or I think you can also just stream it from there
Yeah.
too. So tell
Yeah.
us who did the M Factor documentary and kind of an overview of what it's about.
So there were two women, Tamsin and Joe, they're friends, and they were just talking about some of the things that they were struggling with, which were their menopause symptoms. And they're like, we should create like just a like a like a little YouTube video of, like, educating women going through perimenopause and menopause. Like, these are what we're experiencing. These are things I wish we would have known about. Well, they talked to more and more people during this interview because they were just starting to interview some people about this. And they're like, oh, wait, we should make a documentary because all these other providers and all these other women want to be involved with this. And so it turned into what was supposed to be a YouTube little video, to turning into this great big documentary on PBS. And so that was released on World Menopause Day. I think it was October 17th.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically, one of my friends, she's, I had been watching, like, I knew it was coming out soon. I was kind of watching it, and she was like, we should host a screening. And I was just like, I've never thought about, like, oh, I was just thinking like a small screening of like maybe 10 people. Like, let's get together at someone's house. Let's just watch it, have a conversation afterwards. And she's like, let's rent a movie theater. And I was just like, oh, I like your big vision. Like, I love that. I love being around people that expand my mind. And so I'm like, Suzanne, you need to think bigger than just, hosting it at someone's house. And so we got into contact with the producers, and they were really good. They're great to work with. And now that the film has been released, they have been so freaking busy, which is amazing. It's so good because people want this knowledge. Women want to know about this. And so basically we were able to meet with them on a couple days a week, while we're leading up to our first screening. And really, they had a lot of Q&A sessions for us, like, do this, do that. Here's some licensing agreements you need to sign for, like all this stuff to really prep us to have a successful screening. And they were incredible. So basically, we had our first screening in Denver, like in Inglewood, and that we had 70 women show up. It was sold out. Like, we couldn't we couldn't fit any
And
more
when you
people
say
in
sold
there.
out, by the way, you did this for free.
We
right?
did this
So
for
let's
free.
just,
We
yeah.
sold out maximum capacity. Like
Hmm.
we could not get any more people, women in that room. It was like, it was so good. But yeah, my goal behind hosting each one of these M Factor screenings was always to have it for free because you can get it on PBS. But I have sponsors that that sponsor the event to cover the cost of food, cover the cost of drinks, and we have goodie bags that we give each one of the
Hmm.
women. And a lot of it is just like, different companies that are local to the area. They're like, they work with women in this space, which is amazing. And I love that because a year ago when I was going through this, I didn't even know, where to go through, who to talk to, like, and trying to find something on the internet. It's just like, it's so overwhelming sometimes, but just to have those local resources, it's just been so good. And that was like the amazing um, part of this whole screening, putting together the screening. Well, 2 points, like meeting other women that have businesses that support women going through perimenopause and menopause. That is huge. Like number one. And number two, having conversations with these women at the events and like hearing their own personal stories. Because I told you about my story. It is not unique. It is
Hmm.
not, it just happened to Suzanne. It happens to so many women, and just to hear their own story. But so yeah, so we had that one in Denver, like in October, towards the end of October, and then there's such a big need for another one on the north side of Denver, so we had that one on Thursday night, and that one was at capacity. We had 50 women there. It was so funny. I was so worried because we had 48 chairs, and I'm like, I think we can get 55. And so it's like I asked a few people if we are like completely full at 55. We weren't going to tell the venue that we had 55 people coming.
I think
So
they
it was
cared.
like
Yeah.
I'm stretching my mindset. I'm like, oh, we can do bigger. So we're gonna have another one in January, January 15th, and we already have like 16 people signed up for that one. So which is great. I just love that because I'm getting text messages from people that attended the events or emails saying, thank you so much for hosting this, because it's just that film brings up awareness of going through perimenopause and menopause. And I had one of my friends come up to me at the end of Thursday. I'm gonna choke up because like she was crying, like she was hugging me and crying to me, and I've kind of seen her self isolate over the last couple years. And I remember I had taken a functional medicine course for nurses, and she goes, "Do you know anything about menopause?" This was like about 2 years or 2.5 years ago, and I at that time I'm like, I want to learn more because I know it's coming up on me, but like I don't know as much information about it. And she's like, I'm struggling right now. So I knew 2 years ago she was struggling. And she came up to me after the film and she starts hugged me and started crying. And she goes, oh my gosh, I finally figured out what's been wrong with me, and what I've been like suffering with for the last few years. And she goes, I would never have known that, like if it wasn't for this film. And it's just like that was so good. So she texted me the next day, like the day, so yesterday, so that would have been Friday. She texted me the day after the event and she said, oh my gosh, she was in menopause at the time, or at right now, and she had a video conference with her PCP, got prescription medication or prescription hormone therapy for her, and she goes, I'm so excited to feel much better, like feel myself again. So it's just like those things that just makes you want to have more of these events because you're making an impact on women and they're not being told these stories. And I think this
Yeah.
film just opens up that conversation. And actually, their tagline is to shred the silence, which we have been quieted by going through perimenopause and menopause because
Yeah.
it's not sexy. So
No,
like,
yeah, yeah. And I hope that messaging starts to change. And I want to just
right.
consolidate a couple of thoughts here because there's like 50 rabbit holes that I feel like we could go down. Um, but number one, I attended the screening on Thursday up in
Mhm.
Erie, which was fabulous. It was so validating, even though
Mhm.
I'm now postmenopausal, menopausal, whatever. It was so validating to not only watch the movie, which I watched initially by myself here at
Mhm.
home and felt so validated and seen by the documentary, but then to be in a room full of other women who are
Right.
experiencing
Mhm.
the same thing, even if your symptoms are different. And the
Right.
same thing is that, oh my God, I am not alone. Like
Right.
every woman is going to experience this. I think, as somebody in the documentary says, if you were born with ovaries,
Right.
you are going to experience menopause. And to
Absolutely.
know that, like, I don't know the right word for this, but it's not that there's anything, quote, wrong with you,
Mm-mm.
right? Like you're going through a natural phase of
It is.
life. And just to have that validated of, oh, I'm not crazy. I think, and so
Right,
many
right.
women in the room said that, oh, I'm not crazy. I'm not
Mhm.
losing my shit. I'm not
Right.
actually like, yeah, I'm depressed, but I'm not like, there's a reason that I'm depressed. It's not just all, it's funny. Oh, see, here I go. Here's the like potentially ADHD brain just going off the rails. Like one of the things that the documentary says is it is all in your head, and
It
maybe we can
is, yeah.
talk about this in a little bit because all of the hormones are in your brain, right? So
Mhm.
anyway, all of that's to say, I'm going to link the link to the M Factor in
Mhm.
the show notes, and it gives you an option to host a
Yep.
screening if you would like to, so you can enter in your information. So I invite women out there, host a screening, have other women over to your
Mhm.
house. There was a Black woman at the event who said,
Mhm.
please share this documentary with all of the Black women in your life and the
Absolutely.
Latina and the Asian women, because they need
That
to know this information too.
yeah, I feel like that, was eye-opening for me.
Oh,
Um,
so eye
women,
opening.
Black women, Latinas, they experience menopause symptoms a lot longer than Caucasian women,
Yep. Yep.
and they often are very underserved. And I think it's, a lot of it can be cultural too, but
Hmm.
they're underserved and and they're struggling. I'm like, but it was really interesting because there were three Black women there. They were sisters and they were all related. And each one of them had a hysterectomy. And you're
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
then the wheels start turning and it's just like, oh my goodness, like, this is a bigger impact because hysterectomy impacts your menopause differently
Yeah.
than if you don't have a surgical um, procedure that affects your uterus. And then, of course, if you have removal of your ovaries, that's a whole nother
Right.
boat too.
Right.
But just to hear that impact, it makes you like start to like look at things differently than maybe you had before. But I
Yeah.
mean, it did for me.
That
So,
was eye opening too when the Black women there shared that experience, and which I was so deeply grateful to them for sharing, because
mhm,
I hadn't been aware that
mhm,
I came home and looked it up afterwards that Black women have hysterectomies at rates 2 to 3 times more
yeah.
than white women, and especially in the South and in rural areas. And
Ah,
that directly plays into the overall experience of menopause,
right.
because having a hysterectomy can kick you into
Yeah.
menopause. So I
Yeah, it
that
can,
that
yeah.
oh, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, yeah, usually, having, a hysterectomy and you keep your ovaries, it usually is about 4 to 5 you experience menopause 4 to 5 years sooner than you typically would have, so it's, like, definitely accelerates, going into menopause faster, so and a lot of people are not really educated about that when they are having that surgical option laid out in front of them.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you have your ovaries removed, like you wake up from surgery and you're in menopause. Like
Yeah.
you literally are right there. So,
Yeah. That brings me, there's some statistics from the movie that I did want to share a
mm,
little bit, and then we're going to talk about the hormone replacement therapy, which is just
yeah,
one aspect of the movie. I do want to say this documentary is not like an advertisement for hormone replacement therapy,
no,
right?
no,
It's
no,
highlighting the misinformation we've had about it.
yeah,
So I want to share some of the statistics from the documentary. And let's first of all come to the fact that you mentioned this when you went to see your doctor, that you had not been experiencing hot flashes. And I
right,
know, like, I have friends who haven't experienced hot flashes, and I'm like, dear God, like that was the first thing I started experiencing very early on. But I think, as the documentary points out, there's about, is it about 20% of women don't experience hot flashes? Is that correct?
right. So about
Yeah.
20 people, or 20 people,
20
20% of
people.
people, 20 people, 20% of people, or women don't experience hot flashes. And
Yeah.
there is a medication out on the market, and I can't think of the name right now. I'm going to say brain fog, but there is a medication that treats hot flashes, which is really good. It's been out on the market, I think, for a couple years, or maybe a couple years.
I think I've seen
So
commercials about that, about the
yeah,
vasomotor symptoms that
yeah,
it's advertising it
exactly.
treats. Right.
So
Right.
absolutely. But I think it's important to note that women experience perimenopause and menopause differently.
Yes.
You and I are
Yes.
going to experience it differently. Some people are like, I never had a symptom in my life, and that beautiful.
Great.
Like that's amazing. Don't downplay your friend or your neighbor or your sister or your, cousin that is having debilitating symptoms. Like, don't downplay what
Yeah.
they're going through, thinking that everyone experiences it differently. I think we just need to make sure that we understand that, like, what I'm experiencing, someone else may not experience, and I could experience, whatever. But I think it's so important that we know that everyone experiences, we will all go through it and we'll all experience it at different degrees. So I think
Yeah.
it's really important to understand that. But yeah, 20% of women don't ever have a hot flash, which is like amazing right now. I'm in that
Yeah.
boat. That could change, that obviously could change in the next day. I mean, it could
Yeah.
be like tomorrow I
Well,
start having.
and the reason I wanted to mention that is that don't use hot flashes as your
Right.
like barometer for whether you're in perimenopause,
And
because
a
you
lot of
may be one of the
physicians,
women who doesn't experience that.
right. A lot of physicians gauge that.
Yeah.
Oh, you're going through, because when you look at hot flashes as a symptom, there's no other explanation for having a hot flash unless you're sick. Obviously, if you're, sick or whatever. But a woman is the only one that experiences a hot flash, and it's always, it's been related to menopause. And so they are like, oh, you're in menopause, you're perimenopause. Yes, you are. They can confirm, yes, you are. And that's the only thing that they can confirm that you are in this state is when you have a hot flash. But
Yep.
yeah, it's just one of those things that some women don't ever experience. And I think it's so important that we understand that. So
Yeah, because it's the thing that's talked about and joked about. And yeah, it can be funny, but it's
yeah,
the tip of the iceberg. So that's
right,
important.
right.
Um, and coming back to the racial discrepancies, white
Mhm.
women generally experience a shorter duration,
Right,
on average of 6.5 years,
right.
compared to, and I'll just compare it to Black women. They have statistics for Latina and Asian women too, compared to Black women who on average is 10 years.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
documentary talks about some of the factors that go into that. So
yeah.
again, just a point of awareness that it starts often earlier in the Black community than it
Mhm.
does in the white community for women, and Black women on average experience it for three and
Well,
a half years longer than
yeah.
white women do. There is an estimated 1.8 billion with a B
Mhm.
dollars lost in earnings
Yep.
annually due to menopause symptoms. And that I get goose. This is firing me up. And I want to come back to that statistic,
Yeah.
um, about the workplace
Oh, yeah.
and how we talk about menopause in the workplace. So we're going to put a pin in that and come back to that. Um, Only 15% of women receive evidence-based interventions for menopause symptoms, and this comes back to the healthcare access, and especially when we're
Right.
talking about different um, classes, and economic disadvantages. The healthcare system is horrible for people who are economically disadvantaged and for just other people too. And so people who don't even have access to healthcare, like they're certainly not getting menopause support. So only
Oh,
15%
absolutely.
of women. And then here's the kicker: a projected 1.1 billion, again with a B, women globally will be experiencing menopause by 2025. 1.5 billion women,
Right.
which is just staggering. So that should highlight the importance of why
Yeah.
we should be having
Yeah.
this conversation.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
let's talk about the hormone replacement therapy, because I will fully admit my view on this has done a complete 180 just in the
Mhm.
last 6 months,
Yep.
because I had traditionally been one of those people who I try as much as I can to just support myself naturally, and try and take as little medication as possible in general. And so when I would traditionally hear hormone replacement, HRT, I would think, nope, not for me.
Right.
Not going to be putting stuff, not going to be giving more money to the pharmaceutical companies into my body, right? A lot of that was due to what I now understand to be misinformation by the WHI study that you mentioned. And this documentary talks about that study and talks about more current and correct, accurate scientific information that's coming out about hormone replacement therapy. So, can you walk us through that, starting with, first of all, what's the WHI and what was the study that was back in 2002? Is that
Yeah.
correct?
It came out in
Around
2002.
around HRT.
Yeah. So WHI is the Women's Health Initiative. They decided to do a big study on women going through menopause and hormone replacement therapy. So at the time, this started kind of in the late 90s. And so they really were looking at women and the effects of hormone replacement therapy on different disease states or different things, as they age. And a lot of hormone replacement therapy back in the days were like synthetic forms. So you
Right.
have Premarin, which when you look at what Premarin is, it is actually pregnant horse urine. So it has um, those the hormones from a pregnant
A
horse.
horse,
so
which is
so
not a human, by the way.
and I remember my mom had a hysterectomy. Gosh, that would have been like, I think it was like, I was either in high school or I think I was in college at the time when she had it. So I remember her being on Premarin for a few years. And when the study came out, she threw out the Premarin, and I was just like, oh my gosh. I'm like, but it was interesting. So the study came out, they looked at women on hormone replacement therapy. So there were flaws with the study. The average age of a woman that was studied was 63. So that's 10 years after going through menopause. And they
After, yes.
started them on hormone replacement therapy 10 years after they experienced menopause. So now they're saying, it's healthier or it's better to start women within 10 years of having menopause on hormone replacement therapy. So they looked at women in two groups, women that were just on estrogen only and estrogen and progestin. And when they looked at it, they saw, oh my goodness, the women with the estrogen and progestin, they have this slight uptick in blood clots, strokes, and breast cancer. So they all of a sudden were like, oh my gosh, there's this, slight uptick in it. Well, progestin is a synthetic form of progesterone. And then they were starting it 10 years after women, and women within that 10 years had probably already aged, had higher risk factors for breast cancer, had higher risk factors for blood clots and strokes and everything else. What we're finding as hormone replacement therapy is actually, once it started sooner, it actually has more of a preventative measure. It's more of protective once you start it later. You can't prevent diseases from happening if you start it 10 years later. And so there's really like, it was like a faulty study. Like it was
Yeah.
looking at the average age of 63. They're starting it 10 years later. But when they're doing more and more studies now, they're like, oh, wait, estrogen alone, actually, the funny thing is that they never talk about what they found out when estrogen alone in that study. They don't promote any of that stuff. It showed a lower risk of colon cancer. It actually reduced the risk of breast cancer, just estrogen alone in that arm of the study. And it showed a few other things that they're like, that was never promoted about the study, but they brought up like, oh my gosh, it increases your breast cancer risk, and that was just the estrogen progesterone alone in that arm of the study. So it really brought a lot of misconceptions to the medical field of like, oh wait, we're not even going to touch like increasing the risk of breast cancer, so we're not even going to prescribe it because we don't understand. We don't want to do any of that. We don't want to put women at risk. And then also there was a lot of confusion for women. But it was interesting. There was a correlation of there was a big drop in women um, that had stopped their hormone replacement therapy. Within a matter of 2 to 10 years after people had stopped that, you saw an increase in women taking antidepressants, sleep medication, cholesterol medication, like all this stuff increased after the fact that this, these women had gone off of this, hormone replacement therapy. And the thing about hormone replacement therapy is you can get it in the generic form. So it's not profitable for most people. But I have to say there's a lot of other businesses because they're seeing women will pay whatever they can pay for to feel better. So there are a lot of businesses that are popping up now with, oh, we'll just, write out all these scripts for you and we'll charge a high amount of money for these prescriptions, which is really hard to swallow sometimes, just
Yeah.
seeing like, what's happening out there. But a lot of providers now, they actually prescribe bioidenticals, which are more like a plant-based, more similar to what is biologically going on in your body. So those bioidenticals, they need to do more research studies on there. And I think I have a feeling like in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see a huge amount of research coming out just because women are saying, no, like, we don't want to feel this way. We want, to have our hormones replaced. So
So I
it's
want
just
to
good to have.
summarize that to hit on some of those key points. This study that came out in 2002, by the way, by the
Mhm.
WHI, that heavily advocated for women to not take hormone replacement therapy, which
Right.
at the time was only synthetic. There wasn't the bioidentical available at the time. And it was based on a faulty study that
Mhm.
had studied women that were way already far into at least 10 years or so
Right.
into the menopause journey, had 10 years beyond their last period,
Right.
and already had a number of risk factors because of their higher age. So the
Right.
study was faulty basically in the data, and consequently when they came out and said stop taking hormone replacement therapy, the number of women who were taking it at the time dramatically dropped off. And not only that, then for the last 2 decades, women have, like myself, been very anti hormone replacement therapy
Right.
because since my mom died from a heart attack, I certainly don't want to increase my risk of heart disease. And the result of that, your doctor even spoke about this because she was one of the panelists at the screening on
Yep.
Thursday because she was practicing.
Yep.
And shout out to Dr. Lorelei Moeller here in
Lorelei
Colorado.
Moeller. Yeah.
Laura Lee, thank you, Moeller.
Yeah.
She said that she saw after that women
Mhm.
calling her up and cussing her out for why did you let me take this? It's going to make me sick. And then women just, as you said, kind of ditching the medication.
Mhm.
And so as a consequence, a lot of doctors are very understandably hesitant to
Right.
want to recommend HRT. And now, I mean, it's been 20 years. Things have changed. The science
Mhm.
is changing. The type of medication that's available is changing. And I know when I mentioned to my primary care physician just a few weeks ago, hey, I'd like to talk about maybe having a conversation about whether hormone replacement therapy is good for me. She said, I don't recommend hormone replacement therapy. Just flat
Oh,
out, I don't
yes.
recommend it. And I thought, well, let me send you this documentary and see what you say. So this brings us back to the conversation of how do we find a doctor and how do you have a conversation? Because hormone replacement therapy may not be for everyone. It's a
Right.
conversation, though,
Yeah.
that you want to find a doctor who's at least willing to have and who's at least willing to look at whether you are someone who is a good candidate for it. So, how can women start to go about finding a doctor and having that conversation with their doctor?
And I think that's so important that you just pointed out. It's a conversation you need to have with your doctor. And I think I don't know what your risk factors are. I don't know your family history. I can educate you about that. And a lot of people out on social media now, they're saying, oh my gosh, hormone replacement therapy is great, or no, it's not great. It's a conversation you need to have with your physician or nurse practitioner, whoever that may be. I feel as though that's the $1 million question. Who do I talk to? How do I find a provider to talk to? Like I said earlier, I think OBGYNs are better to go down that route first because they are more trained in women's health. But that's not to say that all OBGYNs are the same, because some of them
Yeah.
may be only focused on obstetrics care, like when you're, and just, your normal pap smears, that kind of stuff. They may not be as educated in menopausal care. So a couple of things. So if you, one thing that you can do is Menopause Society has a list of providers that are Menopause Society trained or certified. So they at least are certified in menopausal care. So I think it's so super important about that. However, that list can be disappointing sometimes because some of them may not follow what you think you should have. So I think it's important to, interview them. Sometimes what I've told my clients, if they're out of state, what I do is like call an OBGYN and ask them, do any of their providers, um, are they trained or do they prescribe hormone replacement therapy? Or are they knowledgeable in hormone replacement therapy or menopausal care? So they can at least have that, before you even waste your time or your insurance or money or anything on an appointment. I want to make sure that you schedule it with a provider that is actually trained in that area or actually understands, the benefits or whatever of HRT.
Can
And
we
again,
pause on that for just a
oh yeah.
second too? Because that's something really important that the documentary points out, and the big takeaway I want people to have
Mhm.
is that Just because somebody's a doctor, just because they're an OBGYN, does not mean that they know jack about menopause.
Right.
Because
Right.
as the
Exactly.
documentary points out, doctors get, I don't remember what the percentage is, but it's a teeny, if any,
Yeah.
menopause education, it's a teeny
It's a
bit of
fraction.
their overall education, just like nutrition. At one point,
Right.
I think I heard that doctors get less than 8 hours of actual nutrition education. So
Absolutely.
understand that and do your research. Unfortunately, you got to do your own research to
Yeah.
find somebody who is specifically trained in menopause education and
Mhm.
hormone replacement therapy if you want to look at that as a potential option.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's so important because, I mean, they don't get a lot of training. There are some OBGYNs that are becoming more aware of this, and their patients are coming in and asking, more information about it. So I feel like they're, studying up more and more. But yeah, I think it's like, it's hard sometimes. Like, I know I struggled and I went to an online hormone clinic just to find a quick solution, and it was a bridge. I paid a lot of freaking money for it. Like, it was
Yeah.
like I used my healthcare savings account to pay for it because it ended up being, it was like almost 600, no, it was $700 for the first 3 months of like getting the lab work, getting the initial consult, and then doing a 3 month subscription for two medications, and then another set of labs and a consult after that. So it was like about $700 for all of that. And then they wanted to add the third, I was on testosterone and progesterone first, and then they wanted to add estrogen, and they were going to charge me another $280. I'm like, no, no, no. Like, I can get this medication through my own pharmacy because I did my research. I'm like, how much is it going to cost me through my own pharmacy? And it was like $10 each, like for progesterone and estrogen, and testosterone's a little bit harder to get. But then I went back to my old OBGYN, and that she was covered by my insurance. And I was just like, why am I spending out of pocket money? So just know, like, if you don't have a provider in your area, there are options to go to online hormone clinics. Really do your research. There are some that will take insurance and some that will pay you will it's a lot of money. So just know there's options out there. Those can be a bridge to finding someone that's more specialized in your care. And I'm not saying that all online hormone clinics are like that, but the one I experienced, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a lot of money I'm spending to just to
Mm-hmm.
feel better. And but there are, like, you can definitely do a Google search for your area. If you live in the Denver area, obviously, like, I'm going to create a resource tab on my website soon, to put some local people, or people that I
Oh,
trust
good.
to, for care. So that will be upcoming soon. But yeah,
Yeah. And keep
sometimes
in mind
it's
too,
not.
I think as you mentioned, you can look for nurse practitioners too, like that
Yeah,
specialize.
there
Hmm.
are there are more and more nurse practitioners, and shout out to some amazing nurse practitioners, especially in the Denver area, that have been helpful, like with some of these M-factor screenings. We've had a couple on our panel, or actually four on our panel, 4 or 5 on our panel, the last two times.
Hmm.
And they're so good. Like, they are really amazing women that are wanting to help women going through this. And so they have created beautiful practices to support women going through perimenopause and
Yeah.
menopause. So,
So that's a kind of the first step, is doing your research to find the
mhm,
doctor or the nurse practitioner who specializes in menopause, who has training and knowledge about hormone
mhm,
replacement therapy, so that you can see if that's an option, if you want to have that option. And
right.
then, so once you find the doctor, once you find the nurse practitioner, how are they actually going to be able to tell if you're in perimenopause?
So this is where we kind of have a split of two different schools of thought. Perimenopause is, if you're in perimenopause, it's a little bit harder, because if you get you can get lab work done. And it's like depending on what time of your cycle, but then your hormones are all over the place. So 1 hour, your hormones could be really high, later in the day they could be really low, or like the estrogen, progesterone, or like day to day they can change, fluctuate so much because it's a chaotic mess of your hormones fluctuating. So a lot of providers usually don't do a lot of lab work. Although, like, I'm like a numbers person. I have to know, like, at least let me get a baseline. At least let me
Hmm.
know where I'm at today, like in this moment. And then there's that other school of thought, like, of we're just going to treat the symptoms. Like, so then that's why it's so important to track your symptoms. And I think it's really important to like take a look at all the symptoms that you're experiencing. Take a list of these 70 plus symptoms, like, and just start checking. If you're like, I don't even know if this is related to perimenopause or menopause, you can just start checking them off, adding them to a symptom tracker, and just really like noticing over the next couple of weeks, like how, are you experiencing this and how debilitating it is on a day-to-day basis for you. Are you in meetings and you're forgetting that you have this important meeting
Or
coming
just,
up,
yep,
or
exactly.
yeah. So I think it's so super important for us to really pay attention to them and really mark them in importance of like how debilitating they are. And then you take that to your physician or your practitioner and you talk to them about that. If for some reason you have debilitating symptoms and they just kind of like dismiss them, then maybe you need to see someone else. Because I think that's where I know where I felt last December is like she was dismissing my symptoms. And I'm like, and she wanted me to wait. And I'm like, no, like I'm not functioning correctly as a human being, as a mom to my three teenagers. And I mean, shout out to women going through perimenopause and have teenage daughters that are going through puberty. That is like the freaking hardest thing ever. That was the
All the
struggle.
hormones flowing all over
Oh
the
my
place.
gosh. And then my poor son, who's like 18, he's like, what the heck am I walking into each day? Like, it has just been like a wild ride around here. It's like, but I mean, I think it's just super important to really know, like, hey, these are my symptoms. Have that honest conversation with them and really explain how debilitating these symptoms are in your day-to-day life because it's so important. Um, especially if your physician hasn't experienced perimenopause or menopause, maybe they're too young, maybe it's a male or whatever, and they don't understand that. I think it's so important to express like, how debilitating they are because that's so key,
Yeah.
and not to be overlooked or dismissed. So,
Well, and let's normalize it. And this is something the
right.
documentary talks about too. Not only, again, this is something every
Mhm.
woman born with ovaries will go through, period.
Mhm.
No pun intended, period.
Right.
And as the documentary points out, we celebrate
Yeah.
when teenagers go through hormonal changes, when pregnant women go through, I don't know if celebrate's the right word, but it's more
Yeah.
accepted and
Right.
normalized. And then when we start going through, again, the same kind of hormonal changes, just because we're aging women, that is demonized, looked down
Mhm.
upon, dismissed. There's a quote that's in the documentary basically about how from some dude back in the 60s. I don't want to give him airtime, but he had some quote about how women essentially without ovaries lose their value to society. And
Mhm.
that's kind of the overall stigma that we
Yeah.
have about going through menopause and the reason it's not talked about. And so let's just normalize it's just hormone
Mhm.
shit that we're all women are going to go through at some point, and so it's
Right.
not something to be ashamed of. So on the hormone replacement therapy, and then I kind of want to move on to some other more of a holistic approach too. If you let's just assume that you are someone who doesn't have risk factors and that hormone replacement therapy might be a good option for you, what are we learning about how the benefits of hormone replacement therapy and how early you can start hormone replacement therapy?
There are a lot of benefits to hormone replacement therapy because when we have that drop of estrogen, we're noticing women having osteoporosis. So having hormone replacement therapy actually helps with their bone density over time. And so when you think about when women age, and as we get older, and we get older and older, like our risk of frail, being super frail and falling and breaking a hip is actually pretty high. When you look at the statistics, I think they said majority of the people that fall and break a hip are women. I don't know the exact
Yeah.
percentage, but the majority are women because we lose that estrogen, and the estrogen is so good for our bones. And so they start, and they need to change this. This is one thing I think they need to change is like they need to do bone scans sooner.
Yeah.
Once you hit menopause, you should have a bone scan to see, where you're at, because for sure estrogen should be given. It is FDA approved for, I believe it's FDA approved I might misquote myself here, but if you are having bone loss, you should be on estrogen if it's right for you. Um, but yeah, so cardiovascular disease, there's a decrease in that. There's a decrease in colon cancer, taking HRT. And actually just taking estrogen alone actually decreases the risk of breast cancer over time as well. There's a multitude of things. Estrogen does a lot of things for inflammatory. It's a great anti-inflammatory. There's also, it helps, we become more insulin resistant during perimenopause and menopausal years because we have that loss of estrogen that actually helps with our insulin resistance. So we actually become type 2 diabetics a little bit more because after we've gone through perimenopause and menopause, because some of the hormonal changes. Actually, our cholesterol increases too because cholesterol is a building block for all of our hormone production. And so when we have a loss in that estrogen production, our cholesterol actually increases to help increase our estrogen as well. So we will often see that increase in our cholesterol levels. So there's not a specific study out there yet showing the trends of like estrogen does reduce cholesterol. So I don't want to say that, but it may help promote that loss of cholesterol. I think more studies need to be done for that and to actually prove that over time. But there's a lot of health benefits over time. They're thinking that even with Alzheimer's, they're 2/3 of the patients that have Alzheimer's are women. And so they're wondering if there's a correlation with a decrease in estrogen. So, that could help that over time. There's a lot of statements out by the Menopause Society that don't support all of this yet because research is still up and coming. But there's a lot of research happening, like I said earlier, that is up and coming soon. So I think there was a second part of your question that
That was let me come back to that. That is all great information. But
when to start? Oh, when to
yeah,
start?
like is it again, assuming that you don't have risk factors and that hormone replacement could be a good fit for you, is there any point where it's too soon to start? And what are we learning about the ideal window within which it's sort of like you definitely want to start hormone replacement if you can?
Right. What I've been reading up on, you can safely start this when you're experiencing symptoms during perimenopause, but it usually starts off slow. And it's usually, let's start you off, if you still have a uterus, start you off with progesterone. Because you have the fluctuation of estrogen. You can have high estrogen, you can have low estrogen, but if you're having a lot of estrogen kind of related symptoms, they may start you on a low dose of estrogen. Sometimes they wait a little bit more towards closer to menopause to do that, or after menopause to start the estrogen, but they can start the progesterone earlier on in perimenopause. But they usually like that window of time of starting estrogen or the hormone replacement therapy within 10 years of menopause. To have that the actual benefit of that for that preventative portion of it. But I also
and that's within 10 years after your last period.
Yes, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, but those are definitely conversations to have with your physician, with someone that's trained in menopause and hormone replacement therapy to make sure that it's correct for you.
And the big point too, which has really started sinking in with me the last few months, is that the hormone replacement therapy isn't just to help with the symptoms that you're experiencing. Right. If you take it, my understanding, within that 10-year window of your last period, it also has protective benefits. And I think you talked about some of those, like protection against heart disease, protection against breast cancer. So it's not just trying to minimize the symptoms you're having, it's also protecting you long-term down the road. Because as Dr. Sharon Malone, she's one of the doctors in the documentary, she says you're in menopause for the rest of your life.
Right.
So we want to take as much protective action as we can to help with our bone density, our heart health, our breast cancer risk, that kind of thing. So
we age and we live longer than men. However, our vitality at an older age is not as great as men when they are about ready to die. So I think that's really important that we may live longer than them, but we don't live with that vitality as much as we age. So I think it's really important to look at, like, it's not just immediate benefits for today, my symptoms today, but it's looking at, your 85-year-old body and how you can create that into being a healthier version of yourself, in,
Yeah.
20 something years,
One
20,
last thing
30,
before we move into before we move
whatever.
into the other options. Yeah. However, like I'm hoping I make it to 100, out
Yeah,
there on the
I do
trails.
too. I want to be 100
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. You and I had talked about what do women who might have an IUD, how can they start to tell where they are? Because the IUD can interrupt your menstrual cycle. And so if a woman has an IUD, how can they even tell if they haven't had a period for 12 months?
This is the other $1 million question I feel like a lot of people ask me is about IUDs.
Mhm.
I have an IUD as well. And I think it's one of those things that you definitely have to have a conversation with your OBGYN because they're usually the ones that insert those. But it's kind of hard. Like, definitely check are you having some symptoms kind of in that perimenopausal state? But they can often remove that IUD just to see, do you really need it anymore? But there is a blood work that you can take or can have. It's your FSH and your LH, so your follicular stimulating hormone and your luteinizing hormone. Those two hormones will definitely let you know kind of where you're at in your, if you're still perimenopause or menopause. And then also your estrogen level too. You can do that by lab work. You can kind of see before you even take out the IUD, but you can also remove it too. So it depends because perimenopausal women can still get pregnant. So I think it's really important to know that you still, if you're sexually active during this time frame, you still need to have some sort of protection just because your hormones are all over the
Yes.
place and you could be ovulating when you don't even realize you're ovulating.
Yes.
So just super important.
And what about at-home test to test your hormone levels? What is your understanding of how accurate those could be?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I just met with the owner of Prove, Proo, she's actually lives here in the north side of Denver. I met with her actually last weekend and talked to her about that because there are some thought processes that they may not be as effective, or anything like that. She developed this company that basically very unique story. Like she created it for women that were trying to get pregnant because of her own backstory, and then she moved it into because she had all these data points from women getting needing to get pregnant, and she moved those data points into women going through perimenopause. And she told me like they're the breakdown of how they develop or how they do the testing on that, and you actually do a urine test every week for 4 weeks to like check your hormone levels and that fluctuation. So, and those come back with the estrogen and progesterone levels as well. I've not yet performed that on myself. I'm like curious, so I'm going to start doing that just because I'm like I want to make sure I'm understanding this as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it really seems like there's some out there that you don't know much about, like how are they, doing this. But it's basically it's in your urine. You don't have the hormones, but you can have the metabolites from the breakdown from your hormones, is what she was telling me. So more to understand from my point on that. But I think it's just like it might be a good step to like recognizing what's going on. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not 100% sure. Like I feel like I need to do my own test to be like certain
Mm-hmm.
about it. But I think it's a good step for women to kind of like understand maybe what's going on with their body, that maybe they're getting backlash from people not wanting to do lab work, actual blood work on you. I think it's a good first step maybe to like check into that to
Yeah.
see what it's all about. So I think there's some options there, but I'm not as familiar with that one. I just met with her last week about it, and she seems like like what she was telling me about that. I was like, oh, that's really good. As a nurse, I'm like I could relate to like understanding what she was testing and everything. So
Yeah. It seems like a logical direction for this to go, given that, we have tests that we can do at home now for our own genetic
right,
makeup, different kinds of more comprehensive blood work that we can do. And that's kind of a good transition into other supportive
yeah.
avenues for women going through menopause because you are a functional nurse, like you have
Mhm.
functional medicine training, and I want to talk a little bit
Right,
about that. And you approach your whole practice and working with women from a very holistic standpoint.
right.
So, what are some of the other supportive avenues that we know that women can take advantage of to help them make the menopause journey just a little more easeful?
Number one, and for first and foremost, I think with anything that you have, nutrition is number one. We have that's like to me, I feel like that is the root layer, foundational layer that you should
Yep.
start with because we're looking at this cellular level and making sure that at the cell level you are being optimized to perform, effectively. So, and the one way to do that is by nutrition. So I think nutrition is always first and foremost on everyone's mind, or should be on everyone's mind. Some things that are different during perimenopause and menopause is you have to like new protein is so important. We're losing 1 to 3% muscle loss every year after the age of 40. So having eating more protein is going to help you with that muscle loss. But then also fiber. We don't eat enough fiber in our diets as Americans, number one. But fiber is super helpful for perimenopause, menopausal women for two reasons. It helps with visceral fat. We get a lot of visceral fat during this time frame, not because we want to, but our body is like, oh, there's estrogen and visceral fat, so let me increase that visceral fat a little bit. Fiber helps with that visceral fat loss, and it also helps with your blood sugar regulation. So, which is we talked about a little bit about insulin resistance. So the fiber often helps with that. I'm not afraid to eat carbs. I think carbs are very vital. I think
Hmm.
they're good for you. And maybe in 10 years I'll think differently, but as of now, I feel like carbs are super important to you. But because we have that insulin resistance, it's super, super important that we watch how we eat our carbs. So, one thing I've done to help, with my weight loss over the last, year or I don't know, 9 months or so,
Yeah.
was really making sure that I wrap my carbs with a healthy fat, fiber, or
Hmm.
protein. So
Hmm.
basically, what I do with that is like whenever you eat a complex carb, I eat a lot of fruit. I love berries. Blueberries are my thing. But I usually have it with, a protein, a healthy healthy fat or protein or fiber just to make sure that I don't have that spike in glucose, that it maintains that glucose at like a healthy level, at a nice stable level. It keeps you fuller longer. And eventually, your blood sugar will kind of go down over time, but it's not like this quick spike up and a spike down with your glucose. And then once that glucose drops, then you're like, oh, I'm hungry. And so you're eating again. So, like, just it helps regulate your glucose spikes. So, whenever you kind of wrap your carbs up with a protein, fat, or fiber. There's also a lot of good things to eat. Omega 3s are super helpful for you all around. I mean, if you're not getting enough omega 3s, then you can go into the supplement route if you want to. We are chronically low in magnesium, so foods that are high in magnesium are super helpful for you over time. There are some supplements of magnesium if you're having problems with sleep. And anything with supplements, definitely talk to your provider about because whatever medications you're on, you want to make sure that they don't interact with those. Vitamin D levels are usually low too during this time frame. If we're going to talk about supplements, we actually decrease more vitamin D during perimenopause and menopause because of all the fluctuations and changes going on. So it's very good to like get, vitamin D supplement. But this other thing too is probiotics and gut health is super, super important during this time frame because our gut microbiome changes a lot during perimenopause, and we're often not realizing that's what's happening. So we get a lot of bloating. That's another symptom we didn't talk about. We get a lot of bloating and stomach distress. A lot of people get nausea or like they're nauseous during this time frame. But yeah, so like gut health is super important during this time frame. So having foods rich in probiotics. I drink kombucha daily because it's like one of my treats, I
Hmm.
feel like. But like Greek yogurt is super good. Any kind of yogurts that kind of help with that probiotic, you feeding
Fermented
your gut
foods in
well.
general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's nutrition. The second thing is exercise is a little bit differently. We really, really have to focus on strength training during this time frame because, like I said, we have that 1 to 3% muscle loss per year after the age of 40. But also, the other thing about strength training is that because we're losing that muscle loss, our basal metabolic rate changes during this time frame. It actually decreases. And so it's another like increasing our strength actually will increase our basal metabolic rate. And so you're not gaining as much weight, but strength training
Right.
is super, super important. It helps you have strong muscles, you're going to have strong bones. So
Yep.
your muscles and bones are all all attached together. So strong muscles equal strong bones. I do a lot of walking, and hiking. Those are my two things.
Hmm.
My hiking's my cardio. So
Yeah.
is what I
Yeah.
say, like going up on inclines. But I often will walk with a weighted vest. So I have a 12-pound weighted vest that I walk with. It helps me with my core exercises, but it also helps with your bone density as well.
Yeah.
But the other thing is I walk after eating a meal, and that
Yes.
also
I've been
helps
doing that too.
lower your glucose to about 17% after eating a meal.
Mm.
So I try to eat at least walk for 10 to 15 minutes after a meal, and that will help regulate your blood sugar too. So those are a couple things that you can do. But
And
also
just real
doing,
quick on the
yeah,
strength training too, and
mhm,
coming back to the weight gain and the insulin
yeah,
resistance. Like I know a couple of friends who have gained a lot of weight,
mhm,
and they get so frustrated with themselves
yeah.
and beat themselves up and call themselves all kinds of horrible
Oh yeah.
words because of their weight gain. And they're like, and I just can't seem to lose it. I'm doing all the cardio. I think the important takeaway is
Yeah,
to remember, kind of stop banging your head against the wall. Doing high intensity cardio probably isn't going to help you lose
right,
the weight. You really want to focus on the strength training. So I think that's an
right.
important take home.
Right. Which kind of leads into my next thing is stress, because the hit exercises, our cortisol levels are kind of elevated more than normal during this time
Hmm.
frame, because our body's going through a lot of stress physically, and then we have a lot of emotional stress kind of going on outside, our life, a lot of things going on outside of us. Aging parents, teenage kids, or whatever it may be, work, whatever it could be. But our body's also going through a lot of stress. So our cortisol levels are elevated. So we're going to add even more like stress to our bodies with a hit exercise. So I think it's important to recognize like cardio, we grew up being cardio was the queen
Yep.
for
Jane
everything.
Fonda.
Yeah, exactly. Like we did all that step aerobics,
Yep.
like we did all those things. Taibo,
Richard
all those.
Simmons, like all the things. Yeah, exactly. Because that
I
was,
know.
we were the generation of the popularization of those kinds of aerobics.
Yeah,
And HIIT, by the way, is
absolutely.
high intensity interval training for folks who don't know what
Right.
that is. But yeah.
Right. There are some studies saying that sit, so short intensity training or intervals training is actually really good for women going perimenopause. So you do a short burst for 30 seconds and then you rest as long as you want to, like about 3 to 5 minutes, and then you do another short burst of 30 seconds and you rest like maybe 3 to 5 minutes. And they actually said that is actually, so it looks like it's improving women going through menopausal care or perimenopause too.
You could
So
do that
something to
during
kind of look
work
into.
in
I know.
your office. Like do jumping jacks for
Yeah.
30 seconds and then rest for
Mhm.
5 minutes. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
you're all out for 30 seconds. So I think it's really important to like know that. But there's also something called NEAT. So it's like non-exercise training. So basically you park at the very end of the parking lot
Yeah.
and walk all the way in. Instead of
Yep.
taking an elevator, you take the stairs. So
Yep.
just doing those like non-exercise activities, like that is actually helpful for you too during this time frame. So just like think of like how can I improve my steps, like taking, the stairs instead of the elevator, and just those things all help. Just kind of what do you feel more comfortable doing? Sometimes maybe it's just yoga. Like yoga is super helpful to help you with your stress, anxiety. Stretching is so good to do. Like, so just
Hmm.
find Pilates, like those things are so good for us. Like as we age, it's going to help with that muscle and bone density as well.
Yeah.
The third thing we usually talk about is stress management. And I think it's so like we talked a little bit about cortisol, it's how it's going to be a little bit higher during this time frame. Stress management is so important. Like this is where like and you like do mindfulness and meditation. I think is so important. We don't slow down, especially this generation. Like
Nope.
we just like go 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 sometimes, but I think we're maybe getting better as we age, hopefully.
Yeah.
But I think it's good. You can, and I love nervous system regulation. I
Yep.
do. Like you can regulate all you want to with your nervous system, but if you don't identify what is the root cause for causing all the stress in your body, you're gonna just be regulating stress all the time. But
Yep.
you have to identify the root cause of all the stress. because like I had to go down this whole rabbit hole. And I think this is the beautiful thing as we age is that we like, start being comfortable seeing a therapist, or we start like really addressing things that have been a part of our life that we probably should have addressed years ago. And like,
Hmm.
oh, let's just finally address it. So stress management is so good.
And that reminds me of something I wanted to come back to that the documentary mentions when it says that it's all in your head
Right.
is not a gaslighting, you're going
Mhm.
crazy, it's all in your head. It's that the control of our hormones is all in your head. And so
Right.
that's what they mean. All of this hormone dysregulation
Mhm.
starts in your head. And
Right.
I think that ties very much into recognizing the nervous system regulation and
Yeah.
hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that make you
Mhm.
more fatigued, that contribute to weight gain. And one of the ways that we can help manage that, in addition to all the things you've talked about, is with things like relaxation techniques, mindfulness
Yeah.
meditation, because we know that when your nervous system is dysregulated, your body's generating more cortisol, more adrenaline. And so it's creating this never ending cycle.
Right.
And so to find ways to start to soothe and ease your nervous system so that you can down regulate some of that cortisol and adrenaline is so important. So it's not
Right.
in your head from the standpoint of you're crazy. It's
No.
in your head like we want to start to get at the root of that hormone and nervous system dysregulation, both with
Right. And then
the yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, and that's why it's also important for your gut health too, because you have that gut brain
Yes.
connection that's
Yep.
so important. So,
Absolutely. So I just want to go over, we have just as sort of avenues, options. I'm sort of thinking of
mhm.
like a wheel where we have at the spoke or the in the middle is not the spoke, the hub is the
Mhm.
menopause or perimenopause. And then
Yeah.
we have all these spokes coming off for
Mhm.
how can we treat the perimenopause and symptoms. So we have hormone replacement therapy, nutrition, exercise, stress management. What
Sleep
a
is a good one.
sleep. Yes. Oh, and but and the sleep is like, what the hell? I can't sleep when
Oh.
I'm getting woken up 50 times a night by
Mhm.
hot flashes or by being itchy or
Yeah.
joint pain or whatever it is. So sleep is one of those things where it's like that would be awesome and I can't freaking sleep as well. So what do
Right.
you have any words of advice in terms of helping our sleep or changing our relationship with crappy
Mhm.
sleep during this time?
There's a lot of things I think we could probably do an episode
Yeah.
on sleep alone, but I feel there's a couple of things. If what is causing you to wake up at night, or is it night sweats and hot flashes? If it is those, really like address your hormones first. Like what do you need to be on a hormone replacement therapy? Like when I started progesterone, I started it, and I thought, I was sleeping through the night. I thought I was fine, but I would wake up thinking that I could sleep for 3 more hours, and that wasn't like me. I'm an early bird, and once I wake up, I'm like ready to start the day. But I'm like, I would wake up and like, oh my gosh, I could sleep for 3 more hours, and I would just take a while to get out of bed. And then I started progesterone, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the quality of my sleep improved so much. It was so good. So, but if you don't want to be on hormone replacement therapy, there is magnesium L-threonate and magnesium glycinate that can help you with sleep. Melatonin is out there, although I've heard that you should only be on melatonin short term, not long term.
Yeah.
Kind of in the functional medicine world, they kind of say, melatonin should be short term.
Melatonin can be
Um,
tricky with, yeah, especially in
yeah,
terms of its,
because it's yeah, that's a whole nother
yeah,
story.
it's a whole nother,
Like,
just be careful with the melatonin. Like, yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and then also I would say, what are some things that you can do to kind of get your body ready to go to sleep at night? You fall asleep better when your room is when your body drops a degree in temperature, then your body can sleep better. So what does that look like? Do you need cooling sheets? Do you need the window cracked open? Do you need your house to be cooler at night? Whatever it may be. I mean, that's one thing to do. But also leading up to going to sleep, start winding down 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed.
Hmm.
Make sure you don't eat a heavy meal before bedtime. Like make sure you have that 2 to 3 hours before you ate your last meal before you go to bed. And then, which is hard when you have teenagers and they have sports and it's late
Yep.
nights and all that other stuff
Do
and
the
you're eating
best you
like,
can. Yep.
but it's also like dimming the lights in your house,
Hmm.
maybe drinking some chamomile tea, just kind of like, this is my self-care moment of winding down for the day. If you have racing thoughts, maybe it's journaling, getting those thoughts out of your head before you go to
Yep.
bed. And
Yoga or
just those are
meditation before bed, doing
meditation.
and staying off
Absolutely.
your devices, staying
Yeah.
off the damn phone and even TV
Yeah.
too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any type of blue light. If you for sure have to be on some kind of blue light thing, make sure you wear blue light glasses that block that. But at the same time, like wind yourself off. It's easy to get wound up. And I don't even know why they have the evening news anymore or nighttime 10 o'clock news because it just like winds people up right before bedtime. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why just make people stressed out before they go to bed? I haven't
Yeah.
watched the news in years, but
I
like,
yep. I'm in
but
bed
it's just
before
a,
the 10 o'clock news, so
I
I'm like, I even
know. But make sleep very valuable to you. Like that is like
yeah.
when you sleep better, your body, like there's so many processes that happen when you sleep really good. Like your brain is able to, there's autophagy that happens, basically like basically cleans your brain cells out and helps you for the next day to be rejuvenated. It helps you with your blood sugar regulation. It helps you with weight loss. It helps you with your stress. There's so many things like sleep is so important to you. And it's like do as many things as you can to promote your sleep. So, which is hard.
And it is hard, and it's sort of like let's sort of back up because there are so many things that we could do. There are so many symptoms we're
Yeah.
experiencing. Life is so chaotic.
Yeah.
So let's just take a moment, step back,
Mhm.
and what is the first thing that you could start with and do in small increments and just
Right.
try it and see, right? Like you don't have
And
to do all
I
of it at once.
right. I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen coming out of the film is like women are like overwhelmed or like I got to do this, I got to do that.
Hmm.
What is the one thing that is bothering you the most? And like start with that. Because if that's bothering you the most, that's going to stay and you're going to ruminate about that. If you're working on something else, you're still going to be thinking about this one thing over here. For me, it was the weight gain. I was like, I like, I was in a relationship at the time, and then, I was just like, I don't like seeing my body the way it is right now because this is not me. I'm like, obviously at the time he didn't care. But I was like, at the same time, I was just like, I cared. Like, I am not confident in my body, like the way it's looking right now. And actually, it threw me into a depression that I'm not, I wasn't a person that experienced depression. And like, I saw these pictures of me and I was just like, it just threw me into a depression. And I'm like, this is not me. And I'm like, okay, like then, like I wrote out every vulnerable thing that I was experiencing, like from that moment of seeing these pictures of me and the weight gain, and I wrote every raw emotion I was experiencing. And the next day, I'm like, okay, what are the changes I need to make? And so I started with my nutrition and really started with that right away because I knew that was foundation. But for women, I think it's important, like, what is bothering you the most? And let's start that one first. Like, let's start tackling that first because that's going to make you feel better. Like, once you kind of tackle that a little bit, then we can move on to something else. But yeah, one thing at a time. We don't like, we're looking at longevity. We're looking at, what's going to be best for you overall for the long haul. We're not like, we got to make all these quick fixes in 6 months. These are long, lifelong changes that you're going to be making over time.
That's beautiful advice. Two other things, and then we'll kind of start wrapping up here. The first one is what about, and I hate to use the word natural because hormone replacement therapy is natural and we're talking about bioidentical, but what about other natural supplements? I hear a lot of women taking, like my mom took black cohosh or ashwagandha. And granted, that could be a whole nother episode in of itself. And I don't expect you to uh, like give us advice on proper
Yeah.
alternative supplements, but what is something that people how could somebody start to become aware of or do their research? What's the thing they want to be looking for when you're talking about potentially alternative supplements to help with some of these symptoms?
Yeah, so I think that's a whole other web of
Yeah.
stuff because I think it's important. Number one, like what are the symptoms that you are trying to, but then also we have to look at the underlying cause, like what is really causing, because we like it's easy because this is what happened. This is what happened to me personally. Before I started hormone replacement therapy, I was like on 12 different supplements. And so I was just like, just in order to feel better. And like in the long run, like that's a lot. I'm like, I was just like, I was getting tired of taking all these supplements and it was just like
Yep.
wearing on me because it was just like, this is a lot. So you really have to address that. And now, like, now that So I know now that I've started hormone replacement therapy, I'm just on
Yeah.
just a couple supplements. But
Yeah.
like at the same time, like you have to like, what's your symptom, but what's truly like going on in your body, and what's
Yep.
truly going on in your body is like your fluctuation of hormones. So there are some supplements out there. I would just be careful because there are the supplemental industry, and I like supplements. I think they're good,
Yeah.
especially when your nutrition is not there. Like you can't out supplement and a bad
Exactly.
nutrition.
Exactly.
So I think you have to start with your nutrition too. Omega 3s are so important during this time frame, because they help. They have that healthy fats, which actually help with your cholesterol. The healthy cholesterol to actually help you with your, eventually helps you with your estrogen production and everything in perimenopause. So I think it's important. Omega 3s are really, really good. But it's also like you have to look at the different supplement companies too,
Yep.
to really see which ones are really good. If there are some that are third party tested. So if you can find a supplement brand that is third party tested, I think that's super good, because it's another testing that may not have happened in other supplements. So I think it's just something you have to do a lot of research on. There are, I think there, I know that there's some really good people out there that go through the supplements of perimenopause and menopause that we might have to just add to the show links or something like that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think there's good. That one I think takes a little bit more research to do, but black cohosh is one of them. I think chestberry is one of them. Ashwagandha is really good. So those are some of those things that are pretty common during this, time frame too.
Yeah. And I think just in my experience, and you kind of alluded to this with doing your research and finding a company that's been third party tested, is that the supplement industry is not well regulated. So
Right,
supplements tend to have a lot of impurities in them. And so kind of
right.
the big takeaway is it's good to get curious about alternative
Mhm.
treatments and natural remedies, and maybe talk with a functional doctor, because a
Yes,
lot of times your primary care or more westernized doctors aren't going to be a big fan of supplements. So maybe talk
yeah,
with a functional doctor, do your research to make sure that they're third party tested and have minimal
right.
impurities. Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
going down that route of like, I don't want hormone replacement therapy, I want natural supplements, I would, highly suggest going to a provider that's maybe functional medicine trained, that can kind of go down that pathway a little bit more with you in that more of a regulated state than maybe it's just like,
Yeah.
looking at the interwebs.
Yeah.
So,
And you hit the nail on the head, is that you can't supplement your way out of poor nutrition. And I had a
yeah,
functional doctor tell me at one point, like, we'll use supplements as a bridge
yeah,
if you can't get your
yeah,
nutrition right there. But if you're looking to a supplement to try and solve a problem that is a nutrient issue, let's start with the diet first and see what you
right.
can do. One of
Absolutely.
the last things, and this is just uh, to kind of we've talked about all the like bad stuff, so to speak, with perimenopause, and I imagine some women might be feeling overwhelmed, as you said, after
Hmm.
you watch the documentary. And so I kind of want to bring us up a little bit to this perimenopause and menopause. It is a very sacred phase
Hmm.
of our lives, and in a lot of kind of our
Absolutely.
indigenous cultures, no matter what your ethnicity or background, I'll take for example me with my Scottish, Irish, English heritage. There's a lot of Celtic or Druid practices, so more indigenous practices that you might have in your lineages, to remind you that this is across all cultures for women, from a historical perspective, something that was treated as more sacred. It's really in our Western society and more recently that we've started demonizing it and making it something that women are feeling ashamed of. And so, if we can kind of get back to our roots, get back to maybe indigenous practices, get curious about, well, hey, I'm Scottish. Maybe what did Scottish women back in the day do to really to help support us and to celebrate that this is temporary. It's a transitional phase, and there is some freedom to be found. Maybe not in the moment when you're suffering with all the things, and to sort of have that invitation to know that there can be freedom from having periods, a freaking men, right? Like freedom from cramping. So what could be something with a little more hope, a little more light at the end of the tunnel, that you'd like to leave women with when it comes to perimenopause and menopause?
I think just within the last few months for myself, I have Actually, I feel like this has been, despite all the frustration, despite the weight gain, despite all these symptoms I was experiencing and my whole story, I actually, this is probably the most beautiful time I've had in my life, where I've figured out who I am. I understand what my values are. I know what my boundaries are. I started to love myself more than I ever had in this time period. And I wouldn't have had to do that. I wouldn't have done that if I didn't go through this experience of really hitting rock bottom and like trying to find my way out of it. And I think like I've realized like I've learned to love my body so much more than I ever have in my life. And I think that's a beautiful thing, especially like you said, alluded to that in a society that demonizes women aging, just how it is. I think this is the time frame that, I was just like, I get to live and experience this. I get the privilege of living past my reproductive years, and this is a beautiful thing. And I love my body because it's always on my side. And I just need to be listening to my body and allowing it to go through this beautiful process of aging beautifully over time. So I think it's easy to weaponize and demonize going through this because we're frustrated. But at the end of the day, it's like we get to experience. Maybe I sound like Pollyanna or something, but it's been a beautiful process for me of just loving my body so much better than I ever have in my whole entire life.
That is powerfully and beautifully said. Beautiful,
Yeah,
beautiful
thanks.
end to that conversation. Is there anything that I didn't ask you or that you want to add to anything that we said?
Well, I feel like we could talk more, but
I know. This might just be like a part one conversation. And it's hopefully more conversations that I'd like to have. I mean, I would
absolutely.
like, God willing, to get some of the women from the documentary on the
Oh yeah.
podcast. And I'm going to try and include a bunch of more resources, including the link to the M Factor documentary in the show notes. And one of the things I did want to mention, one of the women on the documentary, and I apologize if I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of her name, is Omasade Bernie Scott, who
Mhm.
is one of the women in charge of Black Girls Guide to Surviving Menopause. She has some very powerful messages and
Mhm.
stories and lessons that she shares in the documentary. And so I'm going to include the link. There's a podcast and the website that I'm going to include that link in the show notes too, because again, Black women need some additional
Yeah.
support. As well as Latina and Asian women. So,
Yeah.
knowing that there are more resources like that that are catering to women of different races and ethnicities and backgrounds, so I'm going to include as much of that in the show notes as I can. So let's finish up with a lightning round, and
Okay.
then I will let you go. So, what is your fondest Gen X childhood memory?
Mm. Well, I told you I grew up on a farm, but it's so funny. Like my nearest neighbor was like a quarter of a mile down the way. So it wasn't like growing up in my small town where we can ride bicycles and hang out with the neighbors. Like we would have to ride our bicycles really far. But I loved hanging out in nature. I love just going out. Like we have a wooded area and just like sitting in nature and just like getting lost or like going for a bicycle ride around our block, which was like a mile down a gravel road this way, a mile down there this way. It was like this big square, which is a mile each way. So it was like a 4 mile bike ride by the time I got back home. But I love that. And just like having that freedom to like go and do things. And my parents were like, at least you're outside doing something. And then we come home at dark. So
Yep,
like, or we'd be
exactly.
doing chores or whatever. Like we would do a lot of chores growing up too, like, feed the horses and the chickens and the cows and all this other stuff. So we would do that. So that was pretty fond memories of just like being out in nature, which now it's like living in the city and I can always tell like, oh, I need to get out in nature. And so I'll go for a hike. And so it just reminds me of time growing up. So
Very similar. We used to throw my bike because we lived 4 miles either south of town when we lived in the trailer or 4 miles
uh,
west of town when we lived in the stationary house across from the cornfield. So I couldn't ride my bike into town on the highway. So my mom would throw it in the car and I'd take the bike into town so I could ride
right.
bikes with my friends. Yeah.
And
To keep doing.
we had the weirdest things, the craziest things like growing up on a farm. It was just like it was so fun. And like a like moved to the city and then like, oh maybe this wasn't normal. Like we raised a deer. So
Oh, I love that.
it's a whole story in its own. I was like 10 years old and we had this deer that we called Bambi, and that's
Oh,
a whole nother story.
Yep, Bambi. Bambi is my go-to. I love Bambi. We'll have to have a Bambi conversation. I did not know that.
Exactly.
What's the biggest piece of advice that you have for Gen Xers going
Mm.
through? I'm going to change this a little bit. Gen X women going through perimenopause and menopause.
I think we have so much power in pausing. I think it's important because we go, go, go. And then we have life hit us with perimenopause and menopause, and we're trying to like muscle our way through it and find solutions. But sometimes the best thing is to pause and to reconnect to our bodies because we feel so disconnected at this time frame. And I think, having maybe it's journaling, maybe it's hiking, maybe it's just putting your feet on the ground barefoot. Maybe it's meditation, but just pausing is so important during this time frame because it can be overwhelming.
And what's your favorite Gen X era word or phrase?
I would have to say cool beans.
I still say
I
that.
would say cool beans all the time. I say that to my kids now, and they look
I,
at me like I have a third eye. Or like, what are you saying, Mom?
such a dork. I do. I still say it. I don't know. I'm going to have to
No,
look up where that came from, like how that started. Why are
I
beans
know, me too.
cool? I don't understand.
Okay, you find out and let me know.
I will. I'll let you know. And do you have a Gen X era theme song for your life?
Mm, I was born in 76, but I feel like I'm still on that edge of like maybe older millennials. I kind of feel like what defined me, like I graduated nursing school in 98, and the big song then was I think it was Riddance by Green Day. And it was
Oh,
just like talking about going through life and, like living in the moment or whatever, and life passes you by. And it's just like that, like every time I hear that song now, I'm like, oh, that's so many good little lessons and little nuggets in that song that I was just like, it was such a defining moment because I remember playing that like so many times, like as I was graduating nursing school and like moving off and moving up to Minnesota and starting my nursing career up in Rochester. And it was just that was like the theme song of my life then. And now listening to it, I'm like, I could still like, oh yeah, like it's definitely continues on. So
and what do you most appreciate about being a Gen Xer?
mm, um I feel like we're the scrappy generation. Like we're also kind of like the middle child, like we're
Hmm.
sandwiched between the millennials and the boomers, and we're often overlooked. And so we've had to get super scrappy about like finding solutions or finding things and maybe like not being this big like power like overwhelming presence like the millennials or the boomers were, but we're just kind of like sandwiched in between them, but we're like scrappy and we got things done. And I think that's what I think I like most about it is like we're just scrappy. Like we'll figure it out.
I think
So
I just came up with the title for this episode, Scrappy Menopause.
I love
Because
that.
we want to be scrappy. Like, yes, let's
Yeah.
be scrappy. Let's figure this out. Let's speak up for
Hmm.
ourselves. Let's find our
Yeah.
voice and not be gaslit. And
Yeah.
let's find a way to move through this challenging time with full acceptance that yes, it's challenging and
Yeah.
there's freedom and sacredness to be found in it. So
Absolutely.
so tell people where they can find you.
My website is suzannegreinercoaching.com, and I'm on all social media, or try to be on all social medias, Instagram and TikTok. It's Suze Greiner. Facebook, you can find me with my name. And then, yeah, so I'm around.
And don't forget the free download. Again, make sure to click on
Yes.
that so you can have that important guide to have those important conversations with your doctor. So Suzanne, thank you so much. I really appreciate everything that you're doing. I've signed up for both of the events that you have
Mhm.
coming up.
Oh,
I'll put
yeah.
those in the show notes too.
Yeah.
There's a January screening, and tell us real quick about the February event that you're
The
hosting.
February one, I'm super excited about. It's going to be an all-day wellness event for women going through perimenopause or menopause, or if you're even curious about it, you don't even have to be in perimenopause or menopause. But if you're curious about it, we're going to have guest speakers come and talk about midlife health, things that practical knowledge for women to take away from that event to really put into place into their lives to be living their life with vitality in middle age. We're going to have wellness activities kind of geared towards women going through perimenopause and menopause. And we're going to have lots of vendors that support women going through this transition as well. So I'm super excited about this. I'm pretty sure it'll be February 8th, maybe 9th. We're just double checking the venue. And yeah, so I'm super excited about that.
And that'll be live in Denver.
Yes, that will be live in
Yes.
person in Denver. Yes.
I got it already marked on the calendar. I'm on the wait list. Can't wait.
Oh yeah, and if you go to any of my bios in TikTok or Facebook or Instagram, the link is there to sign up for the wait list to be a part of that. So
good. Suzanne, thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful conversation. I know a lot of women are going to feel empowered and learn a lot from it. So thank you for your time and all the wisdom that you shared.
Thank you so much. This was such a delightful conversation. I feel like we could have gone on for a few more hours. So
I will have you back.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to that conversation. What was your biggest takeaway from my conversation with Suzanne? I hope that you learned something that made you have an aha moment when it comes to perimenopause and menopause. I invite you after this to go to PBS, watch the M Factor documentary. Make sure to check out all the resources that I'm going to have in the show notes, as well as Suzanne's free guide for how to have that conversation with your healthcare provider. And before you go, please remember to hit that like, subscribe button so that it bumps this video, audio up in the algorithm so that this conversation can get out to more women and get on their radar. So please take just a moment to like, share, comment, and leave a review of the podcast. Remember to reach out to me with any questions at podcast@lifefromthesummit.com. And while we're on it, I want to invite you to my menopause support circle that I have started for women. It's called Menopause, A New Hope. You can find information at my website, which is lifefromthesummit.com/menopause. You can find the link right in the header. You can find out all the dates. It's a donation-based circle. We meet roughly every couple of weeks online. I'd love to see you there so that you can come and give voice to what you are experiencing during menopause and perimenopause. We can laugh a little bit, form community with other women who are on this journey so that you can remember that you're not alone and that this is a transitional period. We are meant to go through this, and that if we're going through it, if we've lived long enough to experience perimenopause and menopause, we're very fortunate. And while it is so challenging, and it's such a toxic cocktail of all kinds of symptoms, we can remember that there is freedom to be found through this journey and on the other side of it. So here's to finding that freedom. Here's to having these conversations. Thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, stay gold, Gen Xers.